Chapter 255. A young man with glasses was browsing the largest video website when he suddenly noticed a video titled, "Cultivators Really Exist," that had just been uploaded half a minute ago. Out of curiosity, he clicked on the video. The picture was a little blurry, which was caused by the phone shooting at night. Judging from the opposite floor in the video, the position of the person who shot the video should be between the 7th and 9th floor. At the same time, a miserable voice came from the speaker, "Help." It sounded like a chicken being slaughtered. Then he saw a man falling from the sky on the screen, which made his heart skip a beat. He couldn't help but curse, "Immortal cultivator, my ass." Someone obviously fell from the building. At this moment, the figure that was falling suddenly disappeared. He retreated and looked carefully again. He saw that two people suddenly appeared on the opposite wall of the tall building and then disappeared again. One of them was the person who fell from the building, and the other seemed to be a woman. "It's fake, right?" He muttered subconsciously and was ready to refresh the video to watch it again. However, when he refreshed it again, he found that the video was lost. Damn, it can't be real, right? If he had thought it was fake before, then the video had disappeared so quickly, which made his imagination run wild. Conspiracy theories had always been believed by many people. "Boss, look at this video." As a young man called out, a man in his 30s walked behind him and watched. It was the video that had just been uploaded half a minute ago, but the clarity was much higher. Especially after the brightness was adjusted, the two figures in the picture were even more conspicuous. "It's fake," the man in his 30s concluded at a glance. "Boss, this hasn't been processed. It looks real." "Impossible," the man in his 30s concluded. In the video, a woman could be seen rushing at the falling figure at a super high speed. She lifted his clothes and brought him to the opposite wall. Then she stepped on the wall and rushed up diagonally. This was simply impossible. The speed at which a person fell from a high altitude was about 23 meters per second. The speed of the woman in the video was far faster than that. It was not something that a human could achieve. After watching the video 3 times, the man in his 30s looked solemn. Although his reason told him that it was impossible, everything in the video was too real. Most importantly, this video was taken with a mobile phone and had not been modified by any software. In other words, it was very likely to be true. The next morning, this video and the case in S City were spread to some people's desks. Both happened in the same place. In the case of Severny, 11 people died in different locations within an hour. This was not something that 1 or 2 people could do. At the very least, several groups of people had to work together. But at every crime scene, there were only traces of the same man and woman. Coupled with this video, it immediately made some people feel as if they had discovered something incredible, something that could change the perception of mankind. "Find him. Don't use force. Talk to him first." Such an order and the information of the 2 people were sent to a certain department. One of them had detailed information while the other only had an ID card. "The boundless horizon is my love, flowers are blooming at the foot of the rolling green mountains." A dilapidated off-road vehicle was running wildly on the grassland. At present, Renbachien and the Empress were in MG Nation in the north. It was more than 600 kilometers away, and both of them had rushed here in one night. Then they randomly found an unlucky guy, knocked him out and threw him to the side of the road. Now Renbachien had already given up. He had already done vile things and there was no longer any psychological pressure to do other things. In any case, if he was caught, he would be dragged out and shot for 5 minutes. In any case, they wouldn't be able to catch him. In any case, even if they caught him, he could still escape from prison. Renbachien's current target was the country in the north that was known as a fighting nation. It was a country that would duel with bears and beat them until they cried. When he arrived there, he would head west toward Europe. At that time, he might stop at a country in Eastern Europe or go to South America. He heard that it was more chaotic there. To ordinary people, chaos was a terrible thing, but to him, it wasn't a big deal as long as he didn't get shot in the back. Every 7 days he could increase his strength by 15 kilograms. Now, his strength had already reached 225 kilograms. In addition, he was ravaged by that little girl with 2 buns on her head every day. Renbachien felt that he could survive anywhere. Moreover, he was still getting stronger. Even if he couldn't reach the level of the Empress, he could still do whatever he wanted once he reached the level of the winged cavalry. "The air here is much better," the Empress said casually as she looked at the boundless grassland outside. In Deo there were many places like this. Furthermore, the air here was even better. However, compared to S City, this place could already be considered as heaven. "Your Majesty, do you want to try driving?" Renbachien suggested. In any case, it was impossible to drive over such a boundless grassland. Why not let the Empress have some fun and treat it as a go-kart? All right. The Empress didn't really care. It was fine to give it a try. After Rinpoche taught the Empress how to turn, the gear, the accelerator, and the brake, the two of them changed positions. The Empress was fully focused on the front. She stepped on the brake with one foot. When she realized that the car wasn't moving, she stepped on the accelerator as if nothing had happened and stepped on it to the end. Rinpoche, who was caught off guard, was almost thrown into the back seat. Zixiao, you scared me. Rinpoche sat up straight and patted his chest. What do we do now? The Empress suddenly asked. Her voice was very calm and steady. What do you mean? Rinpoche turned his head and looked at the Empress with a puzzled look. He saw that the Empress was holding onto the steering wheel. There was nothing wrong with it. The problem was that only the steering wheel was in the Empress's hands. She actually pulled it out. Rinpoche stared blankly. He looked at the boundless grassland in front of them and then looked at the steering wheel in the Empress's hands. Finally he sighed and said, let's do it this way. In any case, it's a grassland and the car won't overturn. If the car really overturns, Zixiao, you must help me out. Half an hour later, Rinpoche looked at the off-road vehicle that had rolled on the ground for tens of meters before finally collapsing to one side. He then looked at the surroundings. Where could he find another car now? After being carried by the Empress and fluttering in the wind for half an hour, the two of them sat in the off-road vehicle again. This vehicle was slightly newer than the previous one, but this time around Rinpoche wasn't prepared to let the Empress try a go-kart again. After another day, the two of them had already arrived at Rinpoche's original destination, our nation. At night, Rinpoche and the Empress walked on the streets of an unfamiliar city. They were surrounded by tall Caucasians, which made the Empress frown from time to time. The different races of people around her made her feel somewhat uncomfortable. Even if Great Xia and Deyo were two different nations, it still wouldn't make her feel this way. Rinpoche looked around and saw that all the words were indecipherable. The people around him also spoke in a language that he couldn't understand. This caused him to be at a loss for a moment. Suddenly, a bald burly man took 2 quick steps forward and stuck close to Rinpoche's back. He placed a sharp object on Rinpoche's waist and said fiercely. Chapter 256. Rinpoche was at a loss and did not know what the other party was talking about. When the other party saw that Rinpoche did not respond, his face became even more ferocious. At the same time, another person came over and stretched out his hand to pull the Empress into the alley at the side. Before he could touch the Empress, he was sent flying and spat out a pile of broken internal organs in midair. The bald man behind Rinpoche had a ferocious look on his face. He exerted force in his hand and expected to feel the dagger stabbing into a human body. However, the dagger in his hand was caught by something and could not move at all. Unknowingly, the Empress had grabbed the dagger in his hand. With a gentle twist and a push, the dagger directly pierced into the bald man's abdomen. Following which, the Empress slapped the burly man's head. The contents of his head immediately spurted out from his nose, mouth, and ears. By the time Rinpoche reacted, the dust had already settled. Rinpoche turned his head to look behind him and then looked at the calm Empress. He immediately covered his face with a face full of sorrow. They had just run over from China. Before they could even see what the first city was like, the two of them were going to become wanted criminals in our nation again. Their days were simply unbearable. One of his eyes scanned the area outside his palm. There was actually no one nearby. There were only a few figures in the distance. There were also cars driving over from afar. However, the distance was too far and he could not see clearly what was happening here. This wasn't like China. Even in a small county, the streets would be filled with uncles and aunties at night. This place was much more deserted than China. Rinpoche immediately rejoiced. Zixiao, dragged them into the alley. Otherwise we will be hunted down again. The Empress rolled her eyes at Rinpoche. She was a little dissatisfied with his instructions. However, in a flash she dragged the man who was sent flying by her over. Rinpoche also dragged the bald man on the ground into the alley. In such a dark corner, it was very difficult for outsiders to notice. This made Rinpoche feel more at ease. First, he ransacked the wallets of the two men. Their wallets added up to a total of more than 3,000 rubles. Rinpoche did not understand the exchange rate and did not know the prices here. He did not even know if it was enough for the two of them to have a meal. However, he still took it first. This time, he only had 20,000 rubles in his pocket and had not had the opportunity to exchange them yet. Rinpoche asked the Empress to send the two of them to the rooftop. He stood at the entrance of the alley and scanned the surroundings. There weren't any surveillance cameras in the vicinity, and no one noticed what happened just now. It could be considered a silver lining in this misfortune. There were bloodstains on the ground from when the bald man was dragged in, but it would take at least 2 or 3 days to find the corpse on the roof. By that time he would have already left. Rinpoche turned around and looked at the Empress. The Empress's eyes were clear and bright. At first, Rinpoche wanted to advise her not to be in a hurry to make a move. However, after thinking that the other party was already holding a knife at his waist, he decided to just let it be. Previously, when she was fighting with Turkey, the Empress had never wantonly used her martial arts. Presumably she knew what she was doing. "Are you cold?" Rinpoche asked. It was currently summer in July, but the temperature at night should be less than 20 degrees Celsius. Rinpoche could feel a trace of coolness even though he was wearing a short-sleeved shirt. As for the Empress, this kind of temperature didn't affect her at all. However, he still wanted to ask something. He felt somewhat apologetic that the Empress had helped him kill people and accompanied him in being hunted. The Empress turned around and looked at him. Under the dim light of the night, the Empress's eyes were very bright. Rinpoche felt that they were like stars. "Where are we going next?" the Empress asked. "Let's find something to eat first." Rinpoche touched his pockets. Now he was only left with money. However, he didn't know if the shops here accepted RMB. They found a roadside restaurant and ate Russian stewed meat, roasted potatoes, and a bottle of vodka. The taste was a little strange and she wasn't used to it. However, the Empress liked the vodka very much. After this meal, he was only left with 200 out of the 3,000 rubles that he looted from them previously. It wasn't even enough for accommodation. Furthermore, it was obvious that the Empress wasn't full. However, when Rinpoche took out the RMB, she immediately shook her head. This made him feel somewhat helpless. "I might as well rob someone." Rinpoche pondered in his heart. This idea was just a thought. In the end, he didn't put it into action. Rinpoche felt that he still had a bottom line. In the end, the two of them stayed by the riverside for a night. The next morning, they went to the bank to exchange some rubles and found a place to rest for the day. At night, they left the city and found a secluded corner before returning to Dayo. 3 days after the two of them left, 3 people came to this city to inquire about the Empress. After all, the Empress's appearance and red dress made her very recognizable. It was very easy for a group of people to inquire about the two of them. Furthermore, they also noticed a strange case in this city. One of the people seemed to have been hit by a car and his internal organs were almost all smashed into pieces. The other person looked fine on the surface, but his brain suffered a heavy blow. Brain juice directly spurted out from his 5 orifices. The strangest thing was that the 2 people's corpses were found on the rooftop. Some of their internal organs were found on the roadside near the building. However, there were only traces of one person being dragged into an alley. How exactly the 2 people ended up on the rooftop and how they died had become a mystery. This strange case had spread far and wide in this small city. It had become the topic of many people's leisure time. When the few of them heard about the 2 people's deaths, they immediately thought of the man named Jin Wu from a few days ago. His entire body was embedded in the wall and couldn't even be pulled out. Even though the conditions of the deceased were different, there was one thing in common. That was, it didn't seem like something a human could do. After reporting this discovery to the higher-ups, the 3 of them followed the direction in which the 2 people left. After passing by the place where the 2 people disappeared, they kept moving forward, and forward. Then, they realized that the 2 people had actually disappeared into thin air. When Rinpoche saw the surroundings of Yangshin Palace Hall, he suddenly felt as if he had returned home. After such a long time, he almost didn't know where his home was anymore. This was especially so after he became a wanted criminal on Earth. "Your Majesty, it has been hard on you these days." Rinpoche turned his head and said softly to the Empress. The Empress returned to the couch in a flash and stretched her body, highlighting her beautiful figure. She fiercely glared at Rinpoche, who was staring at her, before saying, "It's just a casual attack from a clay chicken or a pottery dog. It's not hard on me." Indeed, on Earth, the Empress's strength made her like a god, and there was almost nothing to be afraid of. Rinpoche casually sat down next to the Empress, bent his legs and asked curiously, "Your Majesty, do you feel like a god on Earth? Everything is like an ant that can be destroyed with a flip of your hand." "Oh." After hearing Rinpoche's question, the Empress fell into deep thought. After a long time she said, "Just like what you said, we are good at different things. The ordinary aboriginals may seem very powerful to you, but to me they are no different from the people on your side. On the contrary, I rather admire some of your things. Knowledge is power. I also agree with this saying." Rinpoche laughed after hearing what the Empress said. The Empress was much more clear-headed than he had imagined. He had thought that after going to Earth so many times and being surrounded by ordinary people without any power, she would have such thoughts. If it were him, with such power he would be able to destroy everything around him with a flip of his hand. Perhaps he would become so arrogant that he couldn't even recognize himself? In the past, he wouldn't even dare to think about the recent events. Now, not only did he do it, but he also didn't feel any psychological burden. At most, he would feel a little sad because he couldn't go home and had to flee. There was a saying that he had seen in movies in the past: with great power comes great responsibility. Chapter 257. Somewhere in Great Xia the cold wind was whistling, and the surrounding forest was covered in white. Jia. 7 or 8 horsemen were galloping on the official road at full speed, and the pedestrians on the road all gave way to them. The man in front was dressed in embroidered clothes with a fur cloak draped over his shoulders. He looked young and his face was cold. The people behind him were all dressed in tight clothes and cloaks, and all of them had a small stream embroidered on their chests. This was the symbol of the Lian family, and anyone with some knowledge in the nearby prefectures could recognize it. After all, the Lian family was considered the #1 power in Zhejiang Prefecture. At this moment, other than the man in embroidered clothes who still looked cold, the rest of the people looked relaxed. This mission didn't require much effort, and the Lian family gave them a lot of points. Many people were thinking about whether they should exchange the points for money or exchange them for a martial arts manual. Just as they turned around to call, the man in embroidered clothes suddenly felt alarmed. He pressed his palms on the back of the horse, and his whole body flew out like a rock spreading its wings. At the same time, dozens of arrows were shot from both sides and all of them were surrounded. The remaining 6 or 7 horsemen roared and wanted to draw their swords, but they were all hit by the arrows and fell off their horses. Only 2 of them managed to escape with injuries on their bodies. "Who's there? Come out." The man in embroidered clothes shouted in the air, drew his sword, and pounced on the figures that appeared on both sides. "Zhu Qingjun, you'll stay here today." 2 figures followed the shout and flew forward. One of them was holding a serrated knife, and the back of the knife was serrated, which could be used to block people's weapons. The other person was holding a short stick. Zhu Qingjuan's expression changed when he saw the weapons in their hands. He knew both of them and they were both from the Lian family. Among the 4 remaining consecrators of the Lian family, only the 2 of them were from the Lian family. The one holding the serrated knife was called Lian Peng, and the other was called Lian Zhan. Zhu Qingjun blocked the long knife with his sword, and focused all his attention on the short stick. As expected, when it was about to get close to him, the short stick suddenly elongated, and a steel awl-like point emerged from the front end. It shook out 6 plum blossoms in the air, covering Zhu Qingjuan's entire body from top to bottom. As expected, Zhu Qingjun thought to himself. If he didn't happen to know the secret of his opponent's short rod, he would have fallen into his trap. A series of clanging sounds could be heard in the air. Zhu Qingjun exchanged a few moves with the other 2. Even though he was fighting 1 against 2, he was only slightly at a disadvantage. "Your strength has actually improved again. Considering your age, you are indeed a talent." Lian Zhan's expression changed in the air, and he could not help but praise. He did not expect that the 2 of them could only barely suppress him in a single exchange. "A living talent is a talent," Lian Peng said coldly. "You all?" Zhu Qingjun was initially puzzled and angry. They were obviously all consecrated members of the Lian clan, so why did they suddenly attack him? Moreover, it seemed like they were determined to kill him. But at this moment, something suddenly flashed through his mind. "You're here with the 7 branches sect to kill me?" Zhu Qingjun shouted angrily after he landed. "Go down and ask the king of hell," Lian Peng said coldly. After Zhu Qingjun landed on the ground, he scanned his surroundings and saw dozens of people surrounding him with knives in their hands. Lian Qizhi sent people to assassinate Qi Zixiao's lover, luring Qi Zixiao to the 9 pavilions. In the end, the 9 pavilions were destroyed and Emperor Xia lost over 10,000 elite soldiers. "Do you all think that you can live after killing me? Lian Qizhi killed me today and tomorrow it will be your turn." Hearing this, the faces of the 2 knights who were lucky enough to survive immediately turned pale and filled with despair. Lian Peng's and Lian Zhan's expressions changed drastically. Then Lian Peng sneered and said, "These people can't hear anything. You are wasting your efforts. As for the 2 of us, you don't have to worry about us." Zhu Qingjun glanced at the people around him and asked, "Do you all think you can keep me here? What if you include me?" A voice came from another direction. "Lian Qizhi, how dare you appear? Zhu Qingjun gritted his teeth and looked over. You are at the peak of the man-wheel level? Halfway through his sentence he suddenly froze and swallowed the remaining half of the sentence, I'll kill you first, into his stomach. Lian Qiji's joints were cracking, and his qi and blood were rolling in his body like thunder. His aura was rising steadily from the peak of the man-wheel level, to the initial stage of the earth-wheel level, to the intermediate stage of the earth-wheel level, all the way to the advanced stage of the earth-embryo level. Why do you think I am the master of the Lian family? Lian Qiji was all smiles. At this moment he was 3 inches taller than before. Zhu Qingjun was speechless. Lian Qiji had always revealed his strength at the peak of the man-wheel level to the outside world, even though many people felt that he wasn't qualified to be the master. Unexpectedly, he was the most powerful person in the Lian family. Now you can go in peace. It's a pity that you don't have any family members. Otherwise I could help you take good care of them. But it's good that you don't have to worry about being alone. Lian Qiji smiled. I'll kill you. Zhu Qingjun looked like he was going to die. There were 3 earth-wheel experts, and one of them was even at the advanced stage of the earth-wheel level. He definitely couldn't escape. He raised his qi and blood to the maximum and pounced on Lian Qiji. Even if he died, he wanted to bite off a piece of flesh from Lian Qiji's body. Lian Qiji flipped his hands and shot out 13 silver beads in a row. All of them hit the body of Zhu Qingjun's sword. When the last bead hit the sword, a dang sound was heard. The sword in Zhu Qingjun's hand broke, and his shoulder was pierced by the remaining force of the last bead. His whole body rolled backward and landed on the ground. Zhu Qingjun covered his shoulder with one hand and was overwhelmed with shock. His sword was considered a rare weapon that could even split a boulder in his hand. Yet it was actually broken by the opponent's silver beads. Lian Qiji was so strong? You can die in peace now, Lian Qiji said softly as he didn't chase after Zhu Qingjun. Just when Zhu Qingjun knew that he was going to die for sure and everyone thought that the outcome was a foregone conclusion, a burst of applause suddenly came from a tree not far away. Everyone was startled by the applause, especially Lian Qiji. There was actually someone hiding in the vicinity without him noticing. Who exactly was it? They saw a young scholar sitting on the tree with a bookcase on his back. He looked like a scholar who was rushing to take an exam. After carefully sensing his aura, he wasn't much different from an ordinary person. However, no one realized that there was someone up there. Even a fool would know that he wasn't an ordinary person. At this moment they didn't dare to act rashly. When I saw you guys coming over half a day ago, I already felt that it would be fun. I didn't expect it to be this fun. This is really too interesting. Qi Zixiao will definitely be very happy to receive you guys as a gift. The scholar was all smiles. Who are you? Lian Qiji was flustered, but he forced himself to remain calm on the surface. Sword come. The scholar didn't reply. Instead, he stretched out his hand towards the sky and let out a long cry. You are the sword master? Lian Qiji's facial expression changed. The other party was actually an extremely rare sword master. Furthermore, he didn't have his sword with him. Lian Qiji immediately felt extremely regretful. 18 silver beads in his hand shot towards the other party's body with a piercing sound. Io, don't be anxious. The scholar seemed to have missed a step, and his entire body fell towards the bottom of the tree. At the same time, a long sword sneakily flew out of the forest and directly landed in the hands of the falling scholar. The scholar was Ning Kaichen and the sword was Lu Zhu. Ever since the last time she went to Deyo, Lu Zhu had been sneaking around like a thief. After a while, Ning Kaichen grabbed Zhu Qingjun with one hand and ran for his life like a happy rabbit. The bookcase behind him was inlaid with a whole row of silver beads. If it was taken off, it would be worth at least dozens of taels of silver. Lian Qiji's silver bullets could even penetrate a 1-foot-thick tree, but they couldn't penetrate this simple and crude bookcase. When I heard you say receive you guys as a gift, I thought you were going to tie them up and give them to Qi Zixiao. Zhu Qingjun endured the pain in his body and couldn't help but say. He didn't care whether the other party would answer him or not. Anyway, he just wanted to speak now. At this moment, Zhu Qingjun had a few more injuries on his body, especially on his legs. When Ning Kaichen appeared, he thought he had met an expert. He didn't expect the other party to actually grab him and run away. He should have thanked the other party for saving him, but he actually used him to block the silver bullets. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so badly injured and his legs were badly mutilated. Anyway, I can just hand you over to Qi Zixiao. Why do I have to do it myself? Ning Caichen's forehead was sweating. When he heard the shouting coming from behind, he quickened his pace. Chapter 258. A month later, A coachman with grizzled hair and a bald and ugly old horse pulled the carriage slowly into Lan City. Ning Kaichen opened the curtains and looked outside. There wasn't much difference from when he first arrived. Everywhere was filled with simple-looking aboriginals who revealed ferocious expressions when they saw outsiders. Zhu Qingjun was lying beside him. The injuries on other parts of his body were not obvious from the outside, but his legs were still tightly wrapped with a white cloth. Occasionally, when the carriage shook too much, faint blood would seep into the white cloth. An earth wheel expert's external injuries would usually scar in less than a day. After all, their physical fitness wasn't comparable to that of ordinary people. Even if his legs had suffered such a serious injury, it would normally take a week for them to recover. However, after a whole month, the wounds on his legs hadn't healed. As for the reason, Ning Kaichen had to ask him. Every day he would give him big bowls of wine and let him eat a type of transparent prawn whose bloodlines could be seen. Zhu Qingjun didn't reject any of these and never questioned them. He just drank the wine and ate the prawn with an indifferent expression. Another important point was that he couldn't muster up much strength. Perhaps this was related to the wine and prawn. Do you have anything else to say? Ning Kaichen put down the curtains and turned to look at Zhu Qingjun. Last words? Can you help me achieve them? At this moment, Zhu Qingjun's body was much thinner than before. His face was paler and there wasn't much luster in his eyes. You can tell me so that you can have some thoughts, Ning Kaichen said softly. He didn't have any hatred or opinions towards Zhu Qingjun. Zhu Qingjun even saved his life. The reason why he didn't let Zhu Qingjun's wounds heal was simple. He wasn't confident that he could watch over an earth wheel expert 24 hours a day. However, if the other party was seriously injured, it would be easy. My parents are long dead and there's nothing to care about. I heard that the people of Dayo like to bury the dead under the plaza. Please find another place to bury me. I don't want to die in peace. Also dig the pit deeper. I don't want to be dug out by stray dogs, Zhu Qingjun said faintly. I'll try my best. Ning Kaichen felt that he could fulfill this wish of hers. He had brought such a big piece of news to Qi Zixiao and even brought her over. She probably wouldn't mind such a small request, right? From Ning Kaichen's point of view, Qi Zixiao was still relatively easy to talk to. Other than her outstanding martial arts, she was a little cold, a little arrogant, a little bad-tempered, and a little ruthless. Compared to those who would turn their backs on him, such as the people from the 9 pavilions, she was much better. At this moment the carriage suddenly stopped. Ning Kaichen lifted the curtain and realized that the carriage was already parked by the roadside. He could hear the sound of hooves coming from behind. He knew that it was Dayo's cavalry, so he went back into the carriage. He wouldn't do something so stupid as to fight with the aboriginal cavalry in Lan City. It didn't matter if it was earlier or later. The most important thing was not to cause trouble. Safety first, safety first. Soon he saw a row of bull riders passing through the middle of the road from the window of the carriage. There were at least 30 of them and they seemed to be guarding someone. Soon he saw the person being escorted through the gaps in the group of knights. Although it was only the back view, he could still easily recognize it. It seems that Qi Zixiao treats him pretty well. Ning Kaichen touched his chin and muttered to himself. He actually had 30 earth wheel experts as his bodyguards. Even most of the princes of Great Xia didn't have such treatment. It's really important to find a good wife. Ning Kaichen began to ponder whether there were any powerful princesses in Great Xia who hadn't married yet. Even if they were slightly older, it wasn't impossible to consider them. This was the life of his dreams. After that group of people disappeared, Ning Kaichen then said to the white-haired old man, "Old Huang, turn right after crossing 2 streets and go to the Honglu Bureau." Ren Baqian naturally didn't notice an old friend by the roadside. At this moment, he jumped down from the fork-horned cow with a face full of joy. He carried an item wrapped in cloth and ran excitedly to Yangxin Palace Hall. "Your Majesty, it's done, it's finally done." Ren Baqian laughed heartily as he strode into Yangxin Palace Hall. At this moment, the Empress's entire body was sunk into the sofa. The sofa was made from the skin of a sharp-toothed tiger. In front of her was a wooden coffee table with a laptop on top. The springs in this world weren't very good. After choosing, Ren Baqian chose a type of spring that wasn't very hard. Coupled with the large amount of cotton that he brought from Earth, it was very easy for people to sink into it while sitting on it. However, the Empress liked it this way. It was very comfortable for her to sink into the sofa. When Ren Baqian ran into the palace hall, the Empress didn't even turn her head. She was completely focused on the laptop. Qing Yuan and Hong Luan stood behind the sofa and glared at Ren Baqian. Is it worth it to exchange 1,000 years of your cultivation for 10 years of his life? There's no such thing as whether it's worth it or not, only whether I'm willing or not. Ren Bachien was speechless. He walked to the side of the sofa and took a look. As expected, the Empress was still reading The Legend of Sword and Fairy. It wasn't until Tsai transformed into a butterfly and left that Lu Jinyuan, who was in a coma, shed a tear. The eyes of Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan turned red. Ren Baqian's face was full of vigor. Was she that touched? What's the matter? Is it done? The Empress acted as if she had just found out about Ren Baqien. Your Majesty, national affairs are more important. Ren Baqien lamented. I know. The Empress waved her hand indifferently. Sigh. Ren Baqien sighed. Recently, the Empress seemed to have opened the door to a new world. As long as she didn't attend court, she would curl up on the sofa and watch television series. As for Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan, they were like the Empress's little tails, following her every day to watch television series. Your Majesty, it's done. Ren Baqien adjusted his mood and placed the cloth bag on the coffee table with a proud look on his face. He opened the bag and revealed 2 round glasses. Why do they look a little green? The Empress asked curiously as she picked up the cup. She had seen a lot of glass cups, so she didn't find it strange. However, the cup that Ren Baqien took out was made by the glass factory outside Lan City, so it naturally had a different meaning. Even Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan didn't look too surprised. They had even watched television series before. Even though this kind of cup carved from gemstones was precious, it wouldn't make a fuss about it. Both of them had seen the world before. It should be because of the iron in the raw material. We just have to think of a way to remove it later, Ren Baqien said happily. Since the glass cups were made, it would be much easier to make them later. However, the biggest problem now was that the furnace fire wasn't very stable, so the success rate was relatively low. This required the workers of the glass factory to try it out bit by bit, and it would probably improve after a period of time. This month, the glass factory was finally built and successfully made the first batch of cups today. However, only a few of them were in good condition, and the 2 that Ren Baqien brought were in the best condition. Can the sun furnace be made? The Empress still remembered the term that Ren Baqien mentioned. In fact, she had learned a lot of words from Earth and some Chinese characters. Well, she learned all of them through television series. She also learned a few words in Russian and English. I want this, in other words it was, I want this. Well, she basically only talked to Ren Baqien. This was the sentence that she most often said to people outside. After a few more days, when the craftsmen are more familiar with it, it will be ready. Ren Baqien nodded. Since the glass was made, the first thing to do was to make the solar furnace. After all, the requirements for making it weren't too high. Previously, when he was in Shurqing, he had already obtained the installation angle blueprint and the mold for the concave mirror. After making the concave mirror, he just had to brush the silver at the back. He had almost memorized the entire set of techniques. While making the concave mirror, he could also train the craftsmen. After that, he could make pure glass products and sell them for money. One had to know that the precious items in the imperial treasury were still there, but more than half of the gold, silver, and jewels were gone. There wasn't much to begin with, and the Empress used it to purchase weapons. The last time Ren Baqien went to the imperial treasury, he saw that it was actually a gift for the Empress's birthday. Now, a portion of the medicinal ingredients were used on Ren Baqien and the glass factory. More than half of the money was used. Ren Baqien only discovered this when he went to the imperial treasury with the Empress recently. Previously, the Empress didn't even mention this to him. This made Ren Baqien feel a little touched but also a little helpless. If she had mentioned this earlier, he could have brought a bag of nail clippers back and sold it for a lot of money. Chapter 259. One on Earth, every city was brightly lit at night. However, in places where the lights couldn't reach, there were often some evil things happening. For example, at the border of our country, in a city that was rich in beauties, 2 bald youths were pointing a gun at a bruised yellow-skinned, black-haired youth. Their faces were filled with ridicule. Khitan people, I hate you. You should scram back to where you belong. A bald youth cursed drunkenly. The black-haired youth's face was filled with fear. He knew who he had met. Those youths were known as the skinheads. They were affiliated with radical parties and held strong hostility towards all outsiders. It wasn't just yellow-skinned Chinese or Vietnamese like him. There were also black-haired people from the Caucasus region, as well as Africans and South Americans. If he met them, he would be punched and kicked. If it was serious, he might even lose his life. 2 years ago, someone was even stabbed to death at the entrance of the university. Now he only hoped that these 2 people would let him go. At this moment, his heart was filled with fear and regret. He shouldn't have come out alone at night. However, he was muddle-headed and wasted time with that junior sister. I have an interesting game. Why don't we play it? The other bald youth had a malicious smile on his face. He tapped the revolver with his finger and the magazine immediately popped out. He slowly inserted 3 bullets into it. There was an empty space between every 2 bullets. His other hand slid on the magazine. The magazine immediately spun. Then he swung the magazine back to its original position. Let's play a game. As long as you don't die, we will let you go. The bald youth had a face filled with malice and ridicule as he pointed the gun at the black-haired youth. The black-haired youth was almost paralyzed on the ground. His face was filled with fear. 3 bullets and 3 empty spaces. In other words, there was a 50% chance that he would die. The other 50% might not be a good result. The other 2 people looked at the terrified expression of him paralyzed on the ground and let out a burst of laughter. This game is very interesting. I also want to play. At this moment, a man's voice suddenly came from the entrance of the alley. He spoke in broken Russian. Word by word. Who are you? Come out. The bald young man turned around and pointed the gun at him. But just as he turned around, he saw a figure rush into his arms at an extremely fast speed and hit him heavily in the abdomen. Another hand grabbed his wrist and pulled, and the gun was in the other party's hand. Before he could do anything else, the man punched him in the ear again, making him unable to move half of his body and seeing stars. His companion was in an even worse state. A woman in red descended from the sky and stomped him to the ground. One could even hear the sound of his bones breaking. Get lost, we islanders hate you pigs the most. Rinpoche held the gun in his hand and pointed at the black-haired man who looked like an exchange student from China. Rinpoche was still speaking in poor Russian. The black-haired youth was dumbfounded at first, then he scrambled away, not daring to look back. After running far away, he still had a baffled look on his face. Was that person really a Japanese? Why did he save her? But at that time that person's back was to the light. Rinpoche actually didn't see that person's face and didn't know who that person was. Rinpoche stepped on the bald young man's head, then lowered his head and took out bullets from his pocket. He loaded 2 more bullets and slid the magazine back to its original position. I like this game. If you don't die, I will let you off. Rinpoche smiled. He had seen many of these bald young men in our nation. A month had passed in Dayo. During this period he came back 6 times and stayed in our nation for almost a month. He didn't know if he was unlucky or if others were unlucky. Maybe it was because he always came out at night or the Empress was too eye-catching. In a month he met a total of 7 such violent young men. Most of them were between 15 and 20 years old. They were very childish and immature. They were muddled by some slogans and their minds were filled with violence. In Rinpoche's heart they were just a bunch of kids. Therefore he must not let them off. Without waiting for the youth to speak, Rinpoche immediately pulled the trigger. Bang! The gunshot was very loud. I'm sorry, your luck isn't very good, Rinpoche said apologetically to the Sakama with ketchup at his feet. The youth under the Empress's feet struggled with all his might. At this moment he had already sobered up from the alcohol and was trying his best to break free from the person behind him. However, that person was like a nail nailed him to the ground and he couldn't move no matter what. I'm sorry, spare me, spare me. That bald young man cried with all his might. It's just a game, why is there such a big reaction? Rinpoche was flabbergasted. Following which, he comforted him gently, be good and listen to me. I am a man of my words. After this shot, I will let you off regardless of whether you die or not. After he finished speaking, he pointed the gun at the other party's head. With a look of disgust, the Empress flashed and appeared a few meters away. Bang! I'm sorry, both of your luck isn't very good. It seems like this game isn't very fun. Rinpoche apologized to the 2 piles of Sakama with ketchup. Following which, he stuffed the gun into his waist. The pedestrians who were attracted by the gunshot immediately screamed in fear when they saw the empty alley and the 2 piles of Sakama. After a while, before the local police arrived, 3 young men and women with black hair and yellow skin dashed into the alley and carefully examined the scene. Was it done by them? One of the women asked quickly. This person's shoulder blade is broken. It seems like it was crushed by someone stepping on it. There is also some mud here. The outline is a footprint. It's most likely done by them. Damn it, they got away again. That woman cursed angrily. It had been 3 months. For 3 whole months, the other party had never restrained himself. Wherever he went, he would cause all kinds of incidents. Most of them were still murder cases. They had been tracking for 3 months and every time they missed by a hair's breadth. They couldn't even catch a glimpse of the other party's back. Every one of them was proficient in one or more of computer, tracking, fighting, firearms, infiltration, information analysis, and driving cars and planes. Every one of them was an elite among the elites. However, they couldn't even catch a glimpse of the other party's tail and were being played around in circles by the other party. At this moment, it wasn't just the three of them. There was another team of 3 people who were also looking for the traces of the other 2 people. This clearly meant that they were incompetent. When they thought about it, they felt that it was simply a humiliation. Now, they had almost forgotten their original intention of looking for the other party. All they could think of was to catch them and wash away this humiliation. If the other party had absconded obediently, they might not have been so angry. However, the other party had never concealed his whereabouts. He swaggered around unscrupulously, but they couldn't even catch a glimpse of the other party's tail. How could they be convinced? On top of a tall building not far away, Rinpoche used a pair of binoculars to look at the 3 people coming out of the alley. He said with great interest, "They seem to have been chasing for a long time and haven't given up yet." Following which, he complained, "There are so many cases in the country waiting for them to handle. I have already run so far away. Do they have to chase me so relentlessly? It seems like I haven't posted on my WeChat moments for a long time." Rinpoche thought for a while. In any case, the other party had been following behind him. Even if he didn't post, they would still know where he was. Thinking of this, Rinpoche switched on the phone that he hadn't used for a long time. Then, he aimed it at himself and the building behind him and revealed a bright smile. Zixiao smile. Rinpoche didn't forget to turn around and shout. The Empress only rolled her eyes at him. The Ren family. These days, Papa Ren and Mama Ren had been worried about their son. They didn't know how he was doing and were afraid that something had happened to him. At this moment, Papa Ren's phone suddenly rang. He picked it up with a start and realized that it was Ren Wanyin, who had just entered university. Sigh. Papa Ren sighed. He had been waiting for his eldest son to call him for some time. Dad, quickly look at WeChat. Brother has posted on his WeChat moments. Papa Ren heard his youngest son shouting excitedly when he answered the phone. What? Papa Ren was shocked. He quickly opened WeChat to check his WeChat moments and saw the photo that the person he wanted to see the most had just posted. Under the dim light of the night, the background was filled with exotic architecture. Rinpoche faced the camera with a bright smile and even made a very old-fashioned peace sign. Not far behind him was the profile of a woman in red with her long hair fluttering in the wind. There was also a short paragraph below. The scenery is not bad, but the temperature is a little low and cold. In addition, it has been cloudy recently. Everyone, don't forget to collect the clothes when it rains. Papa Ren and Mama Ren were stunned when they saw Rinpoche's WeChat moments. The Qin family. Chen Qing and Jiangnan were also stunned when they saw Rinpoche's WeChat moments. This person was simply invincible. He actually dared to swagger and post on his WeChat moments when he was on the run? How much did he want to die? In a car on the street, 2 men and a woman looked gloomy. As the phone rang, the older man lowered his head and looked at the phone. It was a familiar number. He had just reported the situation in the morning. Why was he calling at this time? When he picked up the phone with a gloomy face and heard the content clearly, his face turned as black as the bottom of a pot. A moment later, he received 2 pictures on his phone. On the pictures was Rinpoche's bright smile and that paragraph. The 3 of them looked at the pictures on the phone and their faces turned as black as the bottom of a pot. Chapter 260. 2 days later, Rinpoche and the Empress sat on a train, listening to the rumbling of the train as they toured the rural scenery of this foreign country. They had already left our nation and left on the same night. They first passed through Belarus, which was rich in beauties, then Poland, and finally came to this country. Their destination was the most suitable city for lovers to visit, Prague. Rinpoche had an impression of this city after listening to the song Prague Square. When he chose his route, he specifically chose this city. Ouch, it's so cold. Rinpoche wrapped his coat tightly, and his face turned red from the cold. The Czech Republic wasn't too cold in early October. The temperature was about 16 or 17 degrees Celsius, but anyone who sat on a train and was exposed to the cold wind for an hour would feel very cold. Yes, on the train. Rinpoche and the Empress were on the train and not inside it. The oncoming wind rushed straight into Rinpoche's mouth. Now, his strength was about 150 kilograms and he was much stronger than before. However, this didn't mean that he wasn't afraid of the cold. On the contrary, the Empress, who was at the side, wasn't affected at all by the temperature and the cold wind. Her skirt and hair were blown to the back and danced along with the wind. The Empress had a satisfied expression on her face. She squinted her eyes and hugged her knees. Rinpoche realized that the Empress would squint her eyes when she was satisfied and when she wanted to kill someone. The difference was that when she was satisfied, her nose would wrinkle slightly, but when she wanted to kill someone, the corners of her eyes would rise. It was a very subtle difference. As the front of the train entered the tunnel, the two of them lay flat on the roof of the carriage and waited to sit up after exiting the tunnel. Since I have nothing to do, let's tease them again. With a malicious smile on his face, Rinpoche took out the old phone from his pocket and switched it on. Then he sent a photo of himself in the wilderness behind him. It feels colder today and my face is almost frozen. Traveling by train in this season isn't a good choice. Rinpoche ignored the fact that he was on the train and not inside it. He sent the photo along with this message and switched off his phone. After a while, Papa Rin, Mama Rin, Shenqing, Jiangnan, a certain department was in a state of chaos. Quickly find out where he is. The trio that had been following behind Rinpoche and eating his dust immediately received 2 pictures. Their faces turned as black as the bottom of a pot. Ever since they accepted this mission, the 3 of them felt that they were in a bad mood. It was as if they were living between being teased and trying their best to be teased every day. 3 whole months. No matter who it was, they would go crazy after being teased for 3 months. Ho Yong, where are they? As soon as he received the pictures, the older man among the 3 received a call. As soon as the call connected, he was bombarded with a series of questions. Ho Yong's face darkened. They must have left country R. According to the route, they should be in Belarus now. Find him. Ho Yong hung up the phone and gritted his teeth. He also wanted to find him, but the closest he got was not even a glimpse of his back. Where is he going? Although Ho Yong was furious, he still took out the map and compared the previous route. The cities that the 2 of them had been to before had all been marked. It was a zigzag curve, completely unlike the other fugitives who had a destination. Instead, it was as if they were really on a sightseeing tour. After entering Country R from Country M, they went as far north as Dixon Island, which was close to the Arctic Circle. They also went to Moscow and stayed there for 2 days, leaving behind a murder case. Then they went south to the border of Ukraine before turning west to a border city near Belarus. Not only did their movement seem like they were on a sightseeing tour, but they also had no clear destination. Every 10 days they would commit a murder case. It could be said that they were the poorest, most vicious, and most unscrupulous fugitives that he had seen all these years. At this moment, Rinpoche covered his face with both hands and was deep in thought. Finally, he revealed his major discovery. Zixiao, I think I've been cursed by the Bichi. The Empress turned to look at him and said faintly, "Didn't you already know?" Rinpoche sighed. Ever since he met the Bichi, he was captured by the flower eagle, tried to assassinate, and poisoned. It wasn't easy for him to cure the poison, and he was chased and intercepted in Great Xia. When he finally returned to Dayo, he encountered a murderer and then Jin Jun. In the end, he ended up as a wanted criminal. This wasn't the end. Originally, his goal had always been to run away obediently and live a peaceful life. However, no matter where he went, he would encounter trouble. He would be robbed, attacked, robbed. Sometimes Rinpoche couldn't help but wonder why the security in Country R was so bad. It was a big country after all. How did the Chinese who worked and studied in Country R survive there? Fortunately, he had finally left that country with terrible security and would never go there again. Rinpoche recalled what happened in the past few months and felt that he was simply too unlucky. Other people might not encounter even once in their lifetime, but he had encountered all of them in a few months. He wouldn't believe that the Bichi didn't play a part in this. Wasn't it said that misfortune and blessing came hand in hand? Why was there only misfortune and no blessing? Where was the blessing? The only thing that gave him a little comfort was that he wasn't the one who died. How long will the curse of the Bichi last? Rinpoche couldn't help but ask. 3 to 5 years at the very least, and I don't know how long it will take, the Empress said faintly. She then added, "With me around you won't die." Rinpoche felt warmth in his heart. He grabbed the Empress's hand. "Pa." Rinpoche looked at his hand, which had become swollen like a pig's trotter, and lamented, "Zixiao, it's swollen." The Empress snorted and couldn't be bothered to look at him. When they saw the city in front of them, the Empress carried Rinpoche and appeared by the roadside in a flash. "I'm standing in the square at dusk in Prague, casting my hope in the wishing pond, the flock of white pigeons with their backs facing the setting sun. The scene is too beautiful for me to look at." Rinpoche hummed a tune as he and the Empress arrived at their destination, Prague. Ho Yong held the map and studied it for a long time. He casually asked the young lady beside him, "Cece, if it were you, where would you like to go in the vicinity?" Cece glanced at the map and said without hesitation, "Brago. That's the most suitable city for lovers and relaxation." Ho Yong slapped his thigh. Weren't they a pair of lovers? They had been inseparable for the past few months. They often went to the supermarket together and even went to Turkey together. Who would believe that they weren't lovers? In that case, their target was most likely to be Prague. Quick, book the plane tickets immediately. After finishing his sentence, he called his superior and said, "I suspect that their target is Prague. I'm rushing over now." The other party was silent for a while. Then he said in a relaxed tone, "Team 2 has reached Prague yesterday. You guys should set off quickly. You must find them. The piano keys are shining with light. Shining with light. Painted glass windows. Decorated Gothic churches. Who played a piece of music. A piece of wandering sorrow." Looking at the direction of the music, roses were attached to an oil painting from the 18th century. Quietly admiring at the side. Thinking about your romance. Seeing if it's the same for how long. At this moment, Rinpoche felt that he had maxed out his hip-hop talent. However, in the eyes of the Empress, his hip-hop talent was nothing more than a long-winded mumble. Walking into this colorful city, he felt his heart lighten up. However, he still had to buy some ointment like safflower oil that could remove blood stasis and dissolve blood stasis. Chapter 261. Rinpoche was wearing a jacket, jeans, canvas shoes and carrying a small bag. He looked no different from an ordinary young man who was traveling. If there was any difference, it would be that his female companion was simply too beautiful. It made people cast sidelong glances and endlessly envious of him. On the other hand, the Empress was wearing a red dress that revealed her arms. In such weather, the people around her felt very cold, but she didn't seem to be aware of it at all. Both of them strolled along the streets of the new district of Prague. Occasionally, the Empress would see beautiful clothes in the display window and would faintly say, "Here." Once again, the Empress entered a shop that was filled with an exotic style. She paused for a moment in front of a bohemian-style long dress. It was a red dress with blue, white, and black interwoven flowers on it. At the same time, there were white tulle and tassels below the neckline. It was filled with an exotic style and perfectly accentuated the charm of a woman. The Empress stood in front of this dress and scrutinized it for a moment. She had a rare look of hesitation on her face. It could be seen that she liked this dress very much, but she had never worn such a style before. Most of her dresses were bright red. There weren't too many complicated colors and the style was relatively simple. Many dresses only had a slight difference in the neckline and cuffs. The colors of this dress were too dazzling, and the style was also very complicated. "Zixiao, you will definitely look very good in this dress. In this world, there are only clothes that don't match up to you, and there are no clothes that don't look good on you," Rinpoche said gently. He really wanted to see the Empress wearing such a feminine dress. It would definitely be very alluring. Rinpoche said in a gentle and bewitching voice. However, he was right about one thing. A beautiful person would look good in anything they wore. No matter how old-fashioned the clothes were, the Empress would be able to wear them with the feeling of a runway. After a while, the Empress changed into a dress and walked out of the fitting room. Rinpoche immediately exclaimed in admiration and applauded, "Wow! There's no one more beautiful than you in this world. You are the only one, the most resplendent one. I'm sure of it." At this moment, the Empress was wearing an exotic floral dress. The curves of her upper body were completely revealed, and her hair was scattered on her shoulders and back. The corners of her eyes and the tips of her eyebrows carried a trace of gentleness. Her entire being was filled with the charm of a woman. She was gorgeous and it was difficult for people to take their eyes off her. Rinpoche wasn't the only one. Even the shop owner at the side, a young lady in her 20s, exclaimed in admiration. She quickly ran to the side to retrieve a sky-blue shawl with lace patterns and placed it on the Empress's shoulder. Then she stood at the side and smiled. There was a tinge of jealousy in her smile. While the Empress was standing in front of the mirror and sizing up her slightly different self, Rinpoche had already paid the bill. The price wasn't expensive. The dress and the shawl cost around 700 euros. On the Empress, it made people feel that there should be 2 zeros at the back of the dress. The Empress wasn't used to it after putting it on and wanted to change back into her dress. He stopped her and said, "You should let the whole world know how beautiful you are. Besides, a change of style can also change my mood." The Empress pondered for a while and didn't insist. Rinpoche conveniently took a straw hat from the side and placed it on the Empress's head. It matched the dress very well. As the saying went, a beautiful person would look good in anything. Even a cotton-padded jacket could bring out the vibe of a fashion week. "Can I take a photo?" the shop owner suddenly asked. "What?" Rinpoche didn't really understand the other party's broken English. Of course, even if the other party's English wasn't broken, it would still be very difficult for him to understand. The other party took out his phone and switched it to the photo mode. Rinpoche then understood. "Zixiao, she wants to keep your beauty," Rinpoche said to the Empress with a smile. The Empress held the hat with one hand and allowed the shop owner to take a photo. Then the two of them left the place. Prague was very small. It was more than 400 square kilometers. A level 5 city in Rinpoche's hometown was 40 times the size of Prague. This place was only equivalent to the size of a district in a level 5 city. As the two of them moved forward, the road beneath their feet began to turn into a stone road. It wasn't made of flagstones but small stones. If the soles of their shoes weren't thick enough, the soles of their feet would hurt a little. The temperature wasn't considered high. It was about 17 or 18 degrees Celsius, but it was a sunny and beautiful day. There were always groups of tourists sitting at the tables by the roadside in the cafe. They didn't feel cold at all. Most of them were young couples. There were also friends or families that came here to play. The entire city gave off a very relaxed, leisurely, and comfortable feeling. Rinpoche and the Empress found a cafe and sat down. The Empress held a cup of yogurt and slowly sipped on it. When the dessert was served, she immediately diverted her attention. She tried it once but she didn't like the taste of coffee. Instead she liked the yogurt. Another thing that never changed was the dessert and candy. On the crowded Charles Bridge, two people stood at both ends of the bridge. There was another person standing in the middle of the bridge inspecting the crowd. It's very likely that they have already reached Prague. The photo that person posted on his WeChat Moments just now should be of an area north of Prague. The satellite photo is 90% similar. Pay more attention, especially to the lady in red. The man in the middle of the bridge was handsome, amiable, and had a faint smile on his face. It was very easy for people to let down their guard against him. At this moment he spoke to the other two through the microphone on his collar. There were too many people here. There were also many black-haired and yellow-skinned Chinese people. The lady in red was a more obvious target. Since her appearance, although the style of her dress had changed slightly, the color had never changed. People couldn't help but wonder how much she liked the color red. With her ostentatious and unscrupulous behavior, no one thought that she would change her clothes and hide her whereabouts. "Got it," the other two answered one after another. "Remember, if you find them, don't rashly come into contact with them. Inform me immediately. Also, don't provoke them. They are very dangerous. They are vicious, merciless, and unscrupulous," the man warned again. "Understood." The other two naturally knew how dangerous these two people were. The information that they received from time to time over the past few days had already explained how crazy and ruthless they were. "I will give you a holiday after we return." The man leaned on the bridge and smiled at the passers-by, causing several blonde and blue-eyed beauties to look interested. "Boss, you seem to be raising flags," a man complained. "You talk too much." "Hey handsome, do you have time for a cup of coffee?" A young girl who looked at most 20 years old and was full of energy came forward to strike up a conversation. "Although I really want to go, it's a pity that I'm waiting for someone now," the man said apologetically. His voice was full of magnetism, and his every movement exuded a hormonal aura. The girl's eyes were almost sparkling. "This is my phone number. You must call me when you meet the person." The girl took out a pen and wrote a series of numbers on the back of the man's hand. The man kissed the phone number on the back of his hand and smiled, causing the girl's eyes to light up. "Boss, you are picking up girls again." "I'm being picked up," the man corrected. "There's no justice in this world. Don't be distracted. This trip isn't for fun but for work. Pay more attention to the lady in red." The man repeated his words tirelessly. Looking at the sea of people on Charlie Bridge, he felt as if he had encountered the Golden Week. He had only seen the terrifying sea of people at the tourist attractions during the Golden Week on the internet before. At first he didn't have the money, but later on he didn't have the opportunity. Now he actually felt it in a foreign country. Not only were there many Caucasians here, but there were also many black-haired and yellow-skinned Chinese people. He even saw a group of Little Red Riding Hoods. So many people. The Empress sighed as she looked at the sea of people in front of her. The old city area in front is the most beautiful. Ren Bachyan looked into the distance. Then, the two of them blended into this sea of people. 2 meters away from the two of them, a man wearing a hat was looking around in the crowd. Ren Bachyan. Qi Zixiao. The lady in red. Ren Bachyan and Qi Zixiao's faces were blocked by a few tall young Caucasians in front of them. When those young people got out of the way, the man only saw a blue shawl and a straw hat in the crowd and looked away. Chapter 262. Ren Bachyan and the Empress walked on Charles Bridge. The Empress activated her halo again, and a bone-chilling coldness was emitted from her position. Everyone subconsciously kept a distance of half a meter away from her. This was the subconscious instinct of the surrounding people, and even most people didn't realize this. Although the bridge was like a sea of heads, it was not to the extent that people were rubbing shoulders with each other, so no one noticed this gap. After walking for a short distance, the two of them saw the source of the music and drumming that they had been hearing. A man was sitting on the edge of the bridge, beating a hand drum with one hand and blowing a 1.5-meter-long pipe at the same time. The sound of the hand drum gave the tune a very hollow and distant feeling. The sound of the hand drum made the tune even more primitive. The two of them sized it up for a moment before passing by. There are 30 statues of saints on both sides of the Charles Bridge, each representing a story. As Ren Bachyan walked, he told the story of the statue to the Empress. He was completely looking at his phone as he was telling the story. He wasn't very qualified as a tour guide and wasn't very dutiful either. After telling the story of the statue, he lost interest and immediately stuffed his phone into his pocket. The Empress didn't understand these histories and illusions. She couldn't feel the deep cultural heritage and didn't care at all. Of course, Ren Bachyan couldn't feel it. However, the scenery along the coast from the bridge was very beautiful, especially the old city on the other side of the bridge. There were red and white houses everywhere and tall Gothic towers. These exotic buildings were more beautiful than the statues. He took out his old cell phone and switched it on. Then he stuck close to the Empress and said, "Zixiao, smile." On the screen, one of them had a bright smile on his face, while the other was exquisite and beautiful. Both of them were looking into the distance. The background of the two was a sea of people and the statue of the saint on Charles Bridge. The weather's great, but there are too many people. Ren Bachyan switched off his phone after posting the post. Papa Ren, Mama Ren, Shin Qing, a certain department, everyone was speechless. It was rare for someone to run to this extent. Papa Ren and Mama Ren were speechless as they looked at the photo on the cell phone. This guy was alive and kicking and had a cheerful look on his face. It was impossible to tell that he was a wanted man. The two of them didn't know if they should be relieved or worried. At least for now, Ren Bachyan seemed pretty good. But if he continued to jump around like this, he wouldn't be far from going to prison. The two of them were still full of reverence for their country. Who is this? This woman is really beautiful, even more beautiful than a celebrity. Ren Wanyin was sitting in his dormitory with a very interesting expression on his face, as if he was constipated. As soon as his roommate turned around and saw his expression, he immediately leaned over to take a look at the photo on the phone. Then he was shocked. My brother and his girlfriend, Ren Wanyin guessed. It should be. At the very least, Ren Bachyan could see the shadow of this woman in his WeChat moments. Awesome. You must let me see your sister-in-law in person if I have the chance. I want to see the difference between the real person and the photo. The roommate immediately patted him on the shoulder. Ren Wanyin didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He didn't even know what to say. Was he going to tell her that his brother was on the run because he was wanted by the entire country? Looking at the smug and brilliant smile on his face, how could anyone tell? And he still had the mood to post it on his moments? She had worried for nothing. In the middle of the bridge, a handsome man was leaning against the side of the bridge, his eyes scanning the crowd. Occasionally he would exchange glances with the beautiful women passing by, and he would nod and smile. Then when someone asked for his phone number, he would politely refuse. This had already happened 5 or 6 times. What a beautiful woman. His eyes suddenly fixed on a face under a straw hat in the crowd, and he couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. After so many years of experience, this woman was also the best of the best. In particular, the indifference on her face made people want to conquer her even more. Then he realized that this face was a little familiar. His eyes lit up as he said, "It's her. They are here." At this moment his phone rang. After hesitating for a while, he quickly picked it up. "Shindu there on Charles Bridge." "I've seen it," Shindu said quickly and hung up the phone. At the same time he said to the other 2 people, "The target has appeared. He is at my position." First, he quickly advanced parallel to Rinpoche and then cut in front of them. Can the two of you talk for a while? I mean no harm. Shindu spread out his hands and said. Previously, he had always wanted to meet the two people in a more remote place where it would be more convenient to talk. However, he suddenly felt that such a crowded place was actually better. At least in such a crowded place, the other party wouldn't kill him without saying a word, right? Furthermore, it wouldn't be that easy for them to escape. Not interested. Rinpoche loathed the other party as soon as he saw him. He hated gigolos the most in this life. It shouldn't take up too much of your time. Furthermore, it will be beneficial for you. Don't you want to return to China? Shindu said with a smile. His voice was magnetic and very peaceful. It didn't carry any hostility or make people feel threatened. If it were someone else, they would probably have a good impression of him. For such a person, no matter who it was, no one would dislike him. However, Rinpoche hated him even more. I'm not representing myself. It's not me who wants to talk to you but the nation. Shindu smiled and said to the Empress. It had to be said that Shindu was very good at communicating with people. First, he showed that he wasn't hostile. Second, he showed that he knew the other party's identity but didn't point it out so that the other party wouldn't suddenly explode. Finally, he brought up the killer weapon of the nation. His words could make people's imaginations run wild and want to hear him continue. Especially to two people who were being hunted down. Rinpoche's brain quickly turned twice, trying to guess what the other party meant. The other party was representing the nation? The nation wanted to talk to the two of them? About what? What did the nation know? You look very much like someone I hate, the Water Empress suddenly said. The smile that Shindu had been maintaining suddenly froze. This isn't important. I'm not that person. What's important is to talk to the nation. It's only beneficial for you. I hate him too. Rinpoche turned his head and said to the Empress with his eyebrows knitted together. He really hated this person. If there was a reason, it would be that he was too handsome. What surprised him was that the Empress had already expressed her hatred for him before he even saw her. At this moment, Shindu's smile was really stiff. He completely didn't know how he offended these two people. The next second, Shindu drew an arc and fell into the river under the bridge. Chief! Another man who had just squeezed out from the crowd saw this scene and immediately shouted. Then he also fell in an arc. The surrounding people were completely shocked by this scene. Only a small number of people saw that it was the woman wearing the straw hat who threw the two people into the river. Most of them still didn't understand what happened. I'm your brother and I won't watch the two of you get married. It's simply a disgrace for two men to get married. Both of you better calm down. Rinpoche leaned on the stone railing and shouted to the people below. Some of the surrounding people who understood suddenly came to a realization and rushed to the side of the bridge. There were also people who were good at English who translated what Rinpoche shouted to the others. The people nearby were worried at first, but when they saw the two people emerging from the water, they gave their blessings to the two people below the bridge. Applause rang out from the surrounding people. Chapter 263. Zixiao, who do you think he looks like? After leaving Charles Bridge, Rinpoche turned around and asked the Empress. He was thinking about the 7th Prince of Great Xia. He didn't know how that guy was doing. If he killed him, would he become stronger? It was a pity that the Prince of Great Xia wasn't that easy to kill. What he didn't know was that the 7th Prince's head had already been reduced to bones. It was the evening before he broke through the visualization of water. Hua Sanlu, the Empress said faintly. That person reminded her of Hua Sanlu as he looked like him. However, she understood what he said. Otherwise she would have smacked him to death. The 5th most powerful expert in the world? Rinpoche was surprised. He had never seen Hua Sanlu before and didn't know if Shindu looked the same as him. Maybe they just looked alike. If they looked exactly the same, then it would be more interesting. He asked the Empress what was on his mind. Do they look alike? The Empress shook her head slightly, just a little. Rinpoche nodded. It was normal to have people who looked alike. However, the nation wanted to talk to him? Interesting. I wonder what the nation knows. They probably don't know that I can transmigrate? In that case, they probably know about the laboratory and want to know where I got it. Do I have any other things? This possibility is quite high. I have a lot of good things. It's not impossible to cooperate with the nation. Just like that longevity saber, it's very magical but not very useful. Rinpoche was originally prepared to build a physical chemistry laboratory in the future. Cooperating with the nation would save him a lot of trouble. However, he still had to put on airs. Climbing up a pole wasn't a business deal. At the thought of this, he relaxed and continued to tour the old city of Prague with the Empress. They stopped for a while under the Tower of Charles Bridge and went straight to the legendary Old Square of Prague. I saw them, but the mission failed. Shendu climbed out of the water and used the phone of his companion who wasn't thrown into the water to make a call. What happened? The person on the other side of the phone asked in a deep voice. I don't know, they said they hate me. Shendu gritted his teeth when he said this. He didn't expect that he, who was loved by everyone, would have such a day. The person on the other side of the phone was silent for a while before comforting him. Don't worry, you aren't RMB. Not everyone likes you. Follow them first, the first group will be there soon. Shendu's face was as black as the bottom of a pot. Why do I feel like there's something wrong with your words? There wasn't any conflict, right? The person on the other side asked again. Shendu's face darkened even further. There was no conflict. They just said that they hated me and threw me into the Vltava River. From your voice, it sounds like you're fine. Don't get into a conflict with them. Number 2 is still alright, but I'm afraid that number 1 is somewhat inhuman. This was the code name given by the department. Number 2 was Rinpochen and number 1 was Qi Zixiao. After all, Rinpochen used to be an ordinary person. Everything changed after Qi Zixiao appeared by his side. Qi Zixiao was the key. Rinpochen and the Empress walked around Prague Square for a long time. There were white pigeons flying all around, and they could see couples holding hands and hugging each other everywhere. Rinpochen lowered his head and looked at the Empress's hand. Then he looked at his left hand, which was still swollen. In the end he dispelled that thought. When the two of them were walking around the square, they heard the melodious sound of a bell. They followed the sound and ran to the astronomical clock. I want this. The Empress pointed at the astronomical clock after sizing it up for a long time. Rinpochen knew that the Empress didn't want this clock, but wanted to build a similar clock tower in Lan City. It was indeed much more convenient to have a clock. There was no need to look at the sky to estimate the time. When it was cloudy and raining, the sun couldn't be seen and there was no accurate time. Rinpochen nodded. It shouldn't be difficult to make such a clock. The main thing was to find someone to make the design. Some of the parts that couldn't be made in Dayo could also be made on Earth. After the glass was made, he would sell the old clock and earn a lot of money. In the end, there were too many things that could be used to make money. Sometimes Rinpochen didn't know what to choose. Even the simplest nail clippers could be sold for a lot of money. Needles could also be used. Although Dayo mostly used bone needles, many animal bones that couldn't be found on Earth were very tough after being ground into needles. However, they could still be sold to other countries for a lot of money. In particular, needles were small in size. If a caravan could bring a lot of them, the profits would definitely not be low. After the concave mirror was made, he would specially organize a caravan and carefully prepare some goods. Those countries had been making money in Dayo for so many years, and it was time for them to spit out some of it. They walked and strolled along the way. Very soon the sky turned dark. After dinner, they strolled along the streets of the old city. Suddenly, a bright flame shone in the sky. Fireworks? Rinpochen looked up and was slightly surprised. Following which, a smile appeared on his face. At this moment, fireworks were being set off on a small boat in the river downstream of Charlie Bridge. There were always all kinds of surprises in this romantic city. The Empress was even more surprised than Rinpochen. This was the first time she saw fireworks. The flowers in the sky made her eyes shine with a different light. The light from the fireworks shone on their faces, making them bright and dark at times. Not far away there was a couple hugging each other and shouting in surprise. Rinpochen was infected by this atmosphere. He made up his mind and used his pig-trotter-like hand to grab the Empress's palm. There wasn't the expected paw. Rinpochen grabbed it firmly and a slender and soft palm fell into his palm. Rinpochen turned his head to look at the Empress, but she raised her head to look at the fireworks. However, her eyes were a little wandering and her ears were a little hot. You are the most beautiful treasure that heaven has given to this world, Rinpochen whispered in her ear. The Empress's ears turned even redder. Rinpochen sniffed the fragrance from the Empress's body and felt the softness and warmth of her hand. A kind of satisfaction and happiness filled his heart, making it full of warmth. The fireworks ended very quickly. After all, it was a private fireworks display and wouldn't last for half an hour. When the two of them stood there for a few minutes and still didn't see the fireworks rise, Rinpochen knew that the fireworks had ended. It was a little regretful. It would be better if this moment could last a little longer. However, he didn't let go. He held the Empress's hand all along and pulled her up. Not far behind the two of them there were three people. Two of them were a couple and the other was a single dog. He looked at the couples on the street with a face full of resentment. Rinpoche smiled as he walked past. He listened to the joyful shouts coming from behind him and felt the surging affection between the two of them. Although the fireworks were gone, the warmth between the two of them was still there. He still hoped that the street would be longer so that they could walk a little longer. The Empress lowered her head slightly as if she was counting the stones on the ground. Sorry to disturb the two of you. Three people in front stopped the two of them. The Water Empress raised her head. Her eyes were filled with a bone-chilling coldness. It only took an instant for her to go from warmth to coldness. The Empress's hand left Rinpoche's pig trotter. Feeling the Empress's hand being pulled away from his palm, Rinpoche's eyes widened, and he flew into a rage. You know that I'm disturbing you, yet you still come out. His right hand reached behind his waist, pulled out his gun and fired. His face was filled with resentment. How long has it been? After such a long time, I finally managed to hold her hand and nurture our relationship. How dare you come out to disturb me? You're apologizing to me? If apologies were useful, why would we need the police? Why would he need a gun? The three of them were shocked by Rinpoche's actions. They hurriedly ran to the side and broke the window of the house next to them. Bang, bang, bang. 3 consecutive gunshots rang out, and the stone chips on the ground flew everywhere. Rinpoche gritted his teeth and threw the revolver that he had snatched from them through the window. Chapter 264. When Ho Yong and the other two came out of the house, the two people outside had already disappeared. They are simply too vile, too excessive, too vicious. How could the higher-ups negotiate with such people? Cece gritted her teeth as glass shards fell from her body. It's not like you haven't read the information. Ho Yong was also angry, but he suppressed it because he knew that this was a serious matter. Thinking about the information she had read these days, Cece couldn't vent her anger anymore. The woman in the information was simply inhuman. They were shooting at the ground and didn't really want to do anything to you. Shindu and the other two walked out from the side. Shindu was in a good mood. At least he said a few words and these three people were worse off than him. He immediately felt better. Umph. Ho Yong and the other two snorted. These two people had committed a total of 6 cases in our nation, and about 20 people had died. What they did in China was even more outrageous. The other party had already taken out their guns, and the three of them didn't dare to bet on whether they would shoot them or not. But you guys really deserve to be single. Shindu teased, they are having a sweet time there, but you guys were in such a hurry to disturb them. I already told you to wait a little longer, but you guys didn't believe me. Now that you have lost everything, I don't know when we will be able to stop them again. Stop making sarcastic remarks. Weren't you thrown into the river too? Ho Yong scolded. Being thrown into the river by such a beauty might be a blessing. It's better than being shot. Shindu didn't seem to care. Ho Yong's face turned black. Are you trying to disgust us? Group leader Shin, you must tell us when you and Lu Tong get married. We will give you our blessings, Cece said. Hearing this, Shindu's face turned black as well. That damn bastard was too vicious. I will add a chicken drumstick for you tonight. Ho Yong gave Cece an admiring look. Aren't you going back? The Empress asked casually as she looked at the colorful city under the night sky. She was a little surprised when he opened fire just now. In fact, she already understood what that person on the bridge said in the afternoon. Otherwise she would have killed him with a slap. You look like someone I hate, so I'll kill you. This logic was valid in the Empress's mind. However, the Empress still remembered that Rinpoche had a wronged look on his face when he first escaped. She felt that he probably still wanted to go back. Of course we have to go back, Rinpoche said as he looked down. At this time the two of them were in the astronomical clock tower. Sometimes the two of them would stay in the hotel for a night. Of course they wouldn't go through the front desk. It was indeed troublesome to not have a passport, but Rinpoche had yet to find a suitable person to make 2 passports. At this time, looking at the colorful city under the night sky from the tower, there were still some people wandering in the square below. After hearing Rinpoche's reply, the Empress didn't say anything else. Rinpoche turned his head and looked at the Empress with an expression that said, "Why don't you ask? I'll tell you if you ask." Unfortunately, the Empress didn't even look at him. Rinpoche held back for a long time. In the end, his face turned from one of anticipation to one of bitterness. Sure enough, it was impossible to wait for the Empress to play the role of a sidekick. However, he couldn't see the smile in the Empress's eyes. We definitely have to go back. After all, we're familiar with the place and it's more convenient for us to do anything. However, even though the nation wants to cooperate with us on certain things, the nation is made up of people, and people's thoughts are the most unreliable. If we go back like this, what if people think that we're easy to bully? What if someone points at us and says this and that every day and they feel that it's only right? What should we do then? We can't possibly go on a killing spree or run away again, right? If that happens, the other party won't be able to tolerate it. Therefore, we have to put on airs first. It's better to get what we can't get. This way, after we have a good talk with the other party will scrutinize us carefully, and it will save us a lot of trouble in the future. Just like the Empress, Rinpoche turned his head and looked at the plaza outside as he spoke unhurriedly. He was just an ordinary person with good stuff in his hands. He really didn't want to go back to the city and be in constant trouble. At that time, he couldn't just cause a ruckus at the slightest provocation. The Empress thought about his words. There were too many twists and turns and she felt that it was too troublesome. If someone tried to take advantage of her, she could just slap them to death. If someone came looking for trouble, she could just slap them to death. If someone wasn't pleasing to the eye, she could just slap them to death. There was no need to be so troublesome. The two of them stood there for a long time before Rinpoche said, "Let's go back." The Empress grabbed his wrist, and the two of them disappeared from the tower. On the second and third day, the two groups discovered that the two of them had disappeared again. However, everyone was already used to it. They would always disappear for 8 to 15 days, and then reappear for 3 to 5 days. Many people were curious about what they did when they disappeared. Hiding their tracks? That was impossible. It would be inconceivable if the two of them could hide their tracks. But if they weren't hiding their tracks, what were they doing? At the same time, a certain department in the country invited some people to hold a special meeting. Previously, they thought that by finding the two of them, they would be able to achieve their goal. After all, Rinpoche was still a little red flower. Through some forums, they found some of his previous statements, and it showed that he had trust and a good impression of the country. However, they didn't expect the two groups to actually fail. The other party even pulled out their guns without any hesitation. Even though they only shot at the ground, this also explained some problems. After this meeting, with the help of some people, a group of psychologists, criminologists, and other people was formed to study the thoughts of the two of them. Rinpoche thought that the country was coveting the things in his hands because of the laboratory. In fact, it was only because of a video and some things found at the scene of the Jean family's death that made some people realize that there was a superhuman like the Empress in this world. A superhuman represented too many things such as the direction of human evolution, super soldiers, and many more. Then, they discovered some of the things that the laboratory was researching. The two of them became more important in the eyes of the country. In this newly formed group, they made various hypotheses about the disappearance of the two of them, such as the remains of a prehistoric civilization, an alien spaceship, a legendary paradise, or hibernation. Hibernation was proposed by a biologist. He felt that, according to some of the information, the strength that the Empress displayed was completely unbearable for humans. Therefore, she had to hibernate every once in a while to recover her body. The Empress sat in the seat of honor, looking indifferent and dignified. Not far away sat Rinpoche and the head of the Public Security Bureau, Tai Yen. Two people stood in front of Yangxin Palace Hall. One was Ning Kaichen, the other was Zhu Qingjun. At this moment, even though Zhu Qingjun's face was pale, he looked indifferent and had completely disregarded life and death. Neither he nor Ning Kaichen felt that he could return alive. "What do you want?" The Empress looked at Ning Kaichen and asked. Ning Kaichen couldn't have specially sent Rinpoche over out of kindness. Ning Kaichen smiled shyly. "Actually, I don't want anything. After all, Deputy Prefect Ren and I hit it off at first sight. However, my spirit sword Green Pearl was seriously damaged this time and I need some materials to repair it. It would be great if the Empress of Dayo could give me a handful of cloud crystals, or an appropriate amount of white dragon grass and stone marrow." Tai Yan's eyes were like knives as he stared at Ning Kaichen. Cloud crystals were considered rare treasures, and a handful of them could be exchanged for a city. Even though white dragon grass and stone marrow weren't as precious as cloud crystals, they were still very valuable. "You are really demanding an exorbitant price. You actually want to sell this person for the price of a city? I can't give you cloud crystals, but I will get someone to send you the white dragon grass and stone marrow later," the Empress said. Since someone had delivered the information that she wanted, she wouldn't be stingy with her rewards. As for whether it was worth it or not, according to the words in the television series that day, it didn't matter if it was worth it or not, it only depended on whether one wanted it or not. Soon after, Ning Kaichen was brought away. "Your Majesty, it's my fault." Tai Yin stood up and apologized. "You can collect your salary for 3 months." The Empress waved her hand. "As for this person, I will leave his corpse intact and bury him somewhere outside the city." The Empress's gaze drifted across Zhu Qingjuan's body without a trace of emotion. Leaving his corpse intact was already on account of him telling her everything. "Your Majesty," Ren Baqin suddenly called out. "What's the matter?" The Empress looked at Ren Baqin with a gentler gaze. "I would like to ask you a few questions." Ren Baqin stood up and saw the Empress nodding. He then turned around and asked, "Since the Lien family knows that they have been exposed, will they still stay there?" In his heart, nothing was more important than his life. Especially things like wealth and status. If he died, he would lose everything. What about the Lien family? In order to suppress this matter, they didn't even hesitate to kill people to keep their mouths shut. What would they do now? Ning Kaichen had been here for a month. If they sent people over, they would have already run away. Lien Qiji should be there, and most of them won't leave either. After all, the Lien family is located in the hinterland of Great Xia. I'm afraid it won't be easy for you to send people there. However, they should arrange for a small number of young and talented people to leave and hide first. Zhu Qingjun looked at Ren Baqin and then said faintly. Just like what he said, it wasn't easy for Dayo to send people to the hinterland of Great Xia. The Lien family was located much deeper than the 9 pavilions. If it wasn't for the incident at the 9 pavilions, the Lien family wouldn't be so worried that Qi Zixia would go crazy again. As for the tens of thousands of casualties in Great Xia, it couldn't be blamed on the Lien family. On the contrary, the Lien family's incident this time even led Qi Zixia to Great Xia. Therefore, the Lien family would at most find an opportunity to suppress them, but it wouldn't be too serious. I feel that the most important thing for a family is to be neat and tidy. If the Lien family can't be reunited, it would be too cruel. In order to ferret out the Lien family, we might need a husky. Ren Baqin cupped his hands and said to the Empress. The aboriginals were too conspicuous. It would indeed be troublesome to send people to Great Xia to exterminate the Lien family. Therefore, a mad dog that had a grudge against the Lien family couldn't be better. In any case, even if they failed, they wouldn't lose anything. As for implicating the entire family, he didn't feel any pressure at all. In the first place, they were the ones who attacked him first, so he couldn't be blamed. Just like the Jin family, there might be some among them who didn't do evil and didn't know anything about what happened to him. However, what they enjoyed was the money they earned from their evil deeds. If they succeeded, those people would also enjoy the money stained with their own blood. Since they became rich because of this, they couldn't blame them for suffering because of this. Moreover, if they didn't pull out the roots, wouldn't they be able to survive for the new year? Tai Yin looked at Ren Baqin with admiration and muttered something. The most important thing for a family is to be neat and tidy. These words are good and imposing. I have to memorize them. Chapter 265. Ren Baqin walked into the dimly lit prison. The warden carried a lantern and led the way while Su Wei followed closely behind. Ren Baqin walked with his legs splayed out. He had just returned from looking at the fields outside the city. Every time he rode a fork-horned cow, he would feel a burning pain in his inner thigh. These days he had obtained some fields from other sources. Now he had a total of 200 mu of land. After exchanging fields with others, he finally managed to gather 200 mu of land. After all, everyone still gave the Empress some face. Today Ren Baqin went to take a look at the 200 mu of land. Tai Dao and Teng Hulu were in charge of it. They also hired more than 20 people, including women, children, and the elderly. However, these people were very strong. They were even stronger than the young and strong men on earth. Ren Baqin watched as they carried 2 buckets the size of a water tank with great strides. Previously, when he was injured and asked for forgiveness, he brought 2 bags of seasoning seeds which were only enough to sow 50 mu of land. Fortunately, the sesame seeds in the beast park were ripe and could sow 20 mu of land. The rest of the land was planted with sweet potatoes and other crops from this world. After walking 1 round in the fields, Ren Baqin returned to the city at noon and went to the prison to see Zhu Qingjun. Ren Baqin was rather familiar with this prison. A few months ago he was thrown here when he first arrived. At that time all he could think of was how to keep his head. Who would have thought that things would take a turn for the worse and end up like this? The prison was made of stone on both sides and had an iron door in the middle. There weren't many prisoners in the prison, so there wasn't much noise. There weren't any scenes of people knocking on the iron door and crying out for their grievances like those on television. Foreigners were usually beheaded after staying here for a few days. There weren't many aboriginals who were captured here. At most, they would get into fights and be released after being whipped. Theft and robbery were basically non-existent in Lan City. In Lan City, if you threw a brick and hit someone, that person might be an earthwheel expert. "Open the door, I'll go in and take a look," Rinpoche said when he reached the prison cell. The cell wasn't locked and there was only an iron bar stuck outside. The Aboriginals were too strong and had too many experts. They were never afraid of a prison break. Even if they could, they wouldn't be able to escape. The prison cell was very dark with only a small window shining in. At this moment, Zhu Qingjuan's complexion looked much better. After he stopped drinking wine and eating those shrimps, the injury on his leg was almost healed within a few days. Rinpoche stood at the door and looked at him. He also looked up at Rinpoche. The warden stood in front of Rinpoche to prevent him from suddenly going berserk. He had also heard of Deputy Prefect Ren's strength. "How about it? I saved your life, didn't I? Shouldn't you repay me?" Rinpoche said with a smile. On that day, Zhu Qingju knew that he probably wouldn't die. Although he was imprisoned, he had been waiting to settle the score with the Lien family. He even thought that the other party would say something. No matter what, as long as the target was the Lien family, he would agree. However, he didn't expect to hear such a reply, which made him a little stunned. "I'm naturally willing to deal with the Lien family. But you won't believe me so easily, right?" Zhu Qingjun said. "That's easy. Just one poison will do. It's like a jelly bean. It won't affect anything if you eat it and it tastes pretty good. After taking it, one would die if there was no antidote for a period of time. After taking the antidote, one would live. Isn't that simple? I feel that since the Lien family has treated you so badly, you won't seek your own death for the sake of the Lien family," Rinpoche said. His voice was similar to those villains in his memory. In fact, what he did was similar to those villains. Zhu Qingjun laughed after hearing Rinpoche's words. "It's indeed very simple. Give me the poison." "There's no hurry. I'm still making the poison. Ordinary poisons don't taste good. I spent a lot of effort to coat it with a layer of sugar without destroying its medicinal properties. You stay here for a few days first. I'll let you out after a few days when it's done." Rinpoche waved his hand as though he was thinking for him. Zhu Qingjun laughed after hearing what Rinpoche said. At this stage, who would still care about the taste of poison? Yet, the other party was wasting his time in such a place. "I'm here today to see how you are. I'm relieved to see that you're fine." Rinpoche nodded his head, turned around and left. Give him something good to eat. Don't let him starve. In fact, he didn't need to make poison. It was the job of the clinic. What he needed to do was to pack the sarin gas separately. It was too extravagant to throw the whole bottle out like before. He only had a few bottles left, so he had to use them sparingly. Moreover, if he threw the whole bottle out, not only the Lien family but also the entire city, many people would die. By then, Great Xia would definitely be in an uproar. Rinpoche felt that as a person, it was better to leave some leeway. There was no need to be so ruthless. The most important thing was that Great Xia still had so many experts, especially the top experts. Even though many of them didn't show up normally, poisoning a city to death was too ruthless. Who knew if a few of them would jump out to exterminate evil and defend justice? For example, that fairy like Li Yuanzhu. In any case, no matter who it was, he would be in big trouble. The guards by his side wouldn't be able to defend against such an expert. Rinpoche returned to the palace. After lunch, he sat beside the Empress and accompanied her to watch The Legend of the Sword and Fairy 3. The Empress even asked a few times why there was no The Legend of the Sword and Fairy 2. Rinpoche was at a loss. If the Empress asked him, who should he ask? When it was time to practice, Rinpoche stood in the middle of the training ground. Tong Lan was still opposite him. She was the little Lolita with 2 buns on her head. Just like how the Empress liked red clothes, she liked white clothes. She wore white clothes every day. The only difference was that the flowers embroidered on her clothes were different. "You have put on weight again. You are already 10 years old and should be married in a few years. You are so fat, who would dare to marry you?" Rinpoche trash-talked and looked for the other party's flaws. "You are already an adult but you can't even beat me. Don't you have any shame?" Tong Lan was not polite at all. Her grandfather, Tong Jinye, had told her not to give him face and beat him up ruthlessly. Chance. Rinpoche saw Tong Lan roll her eyes when she spoke and immediately pounced on her like a ferocious tiger. After a month of hard training, his strength had improved a lot. He could already withstand one move from the little Lolita. Bang! Rinpoche lay on the ground and looked at the blue sky and white clouds. Over the past few days he hadn't improved much in other aspects, but his ability to withstand beatings had improved tremendously. Furthermore, he didn't have the slightest bit of hesitation or retreat when fighting. His entire person was more spirited and had an indomitable aura. In the eyes of others he was still a noob. However, Rinpoche knew that he had improved a lot. He had already advanced from a level 1 noob to a level 2 noob. When he surpassed the level 9 noob and became a supreme noob, Rinpoche felt that he would be able to defeat this 10-year-old Lolita. After thinking about it carefully, he didn't know why, but he felt like crying. Such is life. After returning to Earth, Rinpoche went to Vienna from Prague. Vienna was a famous music city with all kinds of concert halls. Rinpoche and the Empress even specially went to listen to a classical concert. After that, their impression of the concert was that they slept soundly. When they returned, Rinpoche had already decided that his next destination would be the fashion city, Milan. They will definitely go to Milan. In a certain department, more than one person thought of this. Arrange for a few people who are good at dealing with people to go there. The men shouldn't be too handsome and the women shouldn't be too beautiful, a psychologist suggested. Following which, he said with some regret, "Unfortunately, I don't meet the requirements." Chapter 266. Rinpoche looked at the poisonous pill in front of him, which was the size of the fist of a 4 to 5-year-old child. His face was full of vigor and his expression was clearly saying, "Are you kidding me? According to your request, take the antidote once every half a month. Otherwise your intestines will rot and you will die. However, this is the limit for the size. The smell of one of the herbs is too strong, and it can't be concealed without a large amount of honey and a few other herbs. If the pill is too small, it won't have enough medicinal power. An earthwheel expert might not die from it." The doctor from the physician's bureau also had a look of disbelief on his face. He had never heard of anyone making this kind of poison that had to be sweet. Or this, the smell is too strong. The doctor took out another box and opened it. Rinpoche smelled a strange smell that made him feel as if it was dug out from his foot. The pill inside was indeed much smaller than the 6-flavored Rehmannia pill that Rinpoche had eaten before. "This is it. You have to keep your word. I told him it's sweet, so it has to be sweet." Rinpoche immediately kept the box and turned to leave. He wasn't eating it anyway. "You have to swallow it whole," the doctor added slowly. Rinpoche waved his arms with his back facing the doctor. Although the people around him were at least at the earthwheel level and didn't seem to be anything special. However, a second-rate aristocratic family in Great Xia only had a few earthwheel experts. Although the earthwheel level was divided into the initial, intermediate, advanced, and peak levels, an initial earthwheel expert could block bullets with a saber, jump 6 to 7 meters high, and have at least 1 to 2,000 kilograms of strength. On Earth, he was already considered a Superman. Zhu Qingjun was at the intermediate level of the earthwheel level and was even stronger. It was easy for him to swallow the pill even if it was a little big. Rinpoche asked someone to bring Zhu Qingjun to the palace. He sat in the garden of Pingle Park with a box on the stone table in front of him. When Zhu Qingjun was brought in, Rinpoche was playing Plants vs. Zombies on his phone. "Wait, it will be ready soon." Rinpoche looked at the phone screen nervously. After a while, he put down the phone and looked at the other party carefully. His cheeks were thin, his lips were thin, and his expression was cold. He gave off the feeling that he was a reliable person. He was dirty and had straw in his hair. However, he was much better off than Rinpoche when he was only wearing a pair of underpants. He seemed to be in good spirits. There shouldn't be too much to say. You work for me and I'll give you the antidote. If you do well, I will detoxify you. You're just an earthwheel expert, so I don't have to spend too much effort on you." Rinpoche sized him up and nodded. Originally, Zhu Qingjun was still wondering what the thing in Rinpoche's hand that could make a sound was. When he heard Rinpoche's words, anger rose in his heart. Rinpoche's words were indeed somewhat arrogant. With his strength, no matter where he went in Great Xia, he would be valued. When had he ever been looked down upon like this? However, after thinking about what he had seen over the past 2 days, even the prison warden was at the earthwheel level. All the imperial guards in the palace were at least at the earthwheel level. Rinpoche couldn't help but sigh. The aboriginals had too much of an advantage. Originally, I could have arranged for anyone to do it. It's very easy to find someone to do it, but I felt that you would be able to drag out the people of the Lien family hiding in the underground cave, so I gave you this opportunity. You can live and you can also take revenge. It's the best of both worlds. It's just a small deal between us. Once you're done, you can fly as high as you want, Rinpoche continued. There are still a few earthwheel experts in the Lien family. Lien Qiji himself is close to an advanced earthwheel expert. It won't be easy for you to find someone to deal with them. Zhu Qingjun couldn't help but ask. Rinpoche's words made him feel that he was worthless in the eyes of the other party. It's not that troublesome. Rinpoche waved his hand and said, "You can throw this small bottle in at night. It doesn't matter if you are a hooligan or a hooligan." When Zhu Qingjun saw the transparent bottle in Rinpoche's hand, he suddenly remembered that even though Rinpoche looked no different from an ordinary person, his name had spread far and wide in Great Xia. Commoners might not know much, but almost everyone with a bit of status knew. Poison warrior. He poisoned the 9 pavilions and tens of thousands of Daeyo's elite soldiers to death. Is that poison in his hand? 8 spirit wheel level pavilion masters of the 9 pavilions died under his poison. Even a spirit wheel expert couldn't withstand it, let alone an earth wheel expert. Indeed, the other party could have just found a random person to throw the bottle into the Lien family. No wonder the other party didn't care about him at all. At the thought of this, Zhu Qingjun felt slightly disappointed. A person's value needed to be recognized by others. When others denied your value, most people would feel disappointed. Alright, eat it, swallow it whole. Rinpoche pushed the box in front of Zhu Qingjun. Zhu Qingjun opened the box and stared blankly. How could a child's fist be swallowed? This medicine is still very reliable. As long as you take the antidote regularly, you will definitely not die. If you don't take the antidote, you will definitely not survive. It won't act up prematurely or later. It's very stable. It's just a little big. I believe in you, there won't be any problem. Rinpoche encouraged him. Zhu Qingjun closed his eyes and stuffed the pill into his mouth. Then he continued to stuff it down. Rinpoche saw that his throat was swollen, just like a snake swallowing a large prey. Seeing that Zhu Qingjun almost choked to death after swallowing the super big pill, Rinpoche hurriedly asked someone to get him some water. It took him a long time to recover from his coughing. After that, Rinpoche gave Zhu Qingjun half a year's worth of antidote, a small bottle of sarin gas and a bottle of antidote. Finally, he gave Zhu Qingjun his contact details before letting someone bring him away. When Zhu Qingjun walked out of the palace, he suddenly felt that the sky was a little brighter. On the way to Daeyo, he thought that he would definitely die. He did not expect that not only would he be able to take revenge, but he would also have a chance to survive. No matter what, the first thing to do now was to take revenge. He had done so much for the Lien family, but in the end he was silenced. He could not rely on the other party to keep his word. He had to find someone to see if the poison could be cured. Although he had to take revenge on the Lien family, the feeling of having his life and death ring in the hands of others wasn't pleasant either. No matter what, he was still an earthwheel expert. Now that he had survived, it was his instinct to want to control his own life. As long as he survived this time, he would definitely work hard in the future. He would work hard by hook or by crook. He would never be looked down upon like this again. The river flows east for 30 years and the river flows west for 30 years. Do not bully the young for being poor. Zhu Qingjun's indifferent face was filled with resolution and determination. Rinpoche's words had more or less hurt his pride. Even if he could understand, he still couldn't let go of the other party's contempt. Oh, that Zhu Qingjun was drinking in a pub? Rinpoche initially thought that Zhu Qingjun would leave immediately. He didn't expect him to find a place to drink first. Was this considered as a way to celebrate his survival? After that, he had a conflict with someone and was severely injured. If it wasn't for the people from the Public Order Bureau who arrived in time, I'm afraid he would have been beaten to death, the guard continued. Rinpoche spat out a mouthful of tea. It wasn't easy for him to save Zhu Qingjun's life. Chapter 267. That night, Zhu Qingjun was quickly sent away from Lan City. Rinpoche really didn't dare to let him stay here any longer. If he were to lose his mind and throw out that bottle of sarin gas, it would be fun to watch. However, Rinpoche also thought of some other matters. After he returned, he wasn't in a hurry to exterminate the Lien family. Instead, he needed to locate the other members of the Lien family first. After all, although they were sent to other places, they still had some contact with the Lien family. If the Lien clan was exterminated first, those people might really conceal their identities and go into hiding. At that time, it would not be easy to dig out those rats. In any case, as long as this husky was sent back to Great Xia, everything else would have nothing to do with him. It would be best if he succeeded, but it didn't matter if he failed. However, he also felt that although the aboriginals were very strong, there were many things that were really inconvenient. For example, if he had another group of people under him, he wouldn't have to go through so much trouble. Another example would be sending spies out. The Aboriginals had very few spies in the outside world. They completely relied on a small number of caravans, such as the 2 caravans of the royal family, to gather some information while traveling outside. There were also a few skinnier Aboriginals who looked more like ordinary Aboriginals from the other empires. However, the Aboriginals weren't good at this. Furthermore, the people from the other nations were also very wary of them, so it wasn't easy for them to gather information. Rinpoche felt that the remnant citizens of the Hao nation in the south were a good choice. However, he now counted the matters at hand. On one hand there was the matter of the glass, and on the other hand, there was the matter of the well salt in the mountains that had not been dealt with. After these 2 matters were settled, he was prepared to make a trip to the south. However, the incident with the glass had caused Rinpoche to pull out quite a lot of his hair. Looking at the hair on his pillow every day, Rinpoche decided to shave his head bald. It was easy to remove the color of the glass as long as the iron in the glass was oxidized with potassium nitrate. Potassium nitrate was also relatively easy to obtain. However, the silver mirror reaction really made Rinpoche want to vomit blood. He listed out all the silver reaction processes that he had found on the internet. First of all, ammonia was not available. Secondly, to obtain nitric acid, one needed nitrogen dioxide plus water, or sodium nitrate plus sulfuric acid. To make nitric oxide, however, you need nitric acid. As for sodium nitrate, he had yet to discover where it could be found in this world. After a long time, it turned out that to need eggs there had to be chickens first. However, chickens still needed eggs to hatch. After Rinpoche shaved his head bald, he started to scratch his scalp. Rinpoche's scalp was about to be scratched off, but he couldn't do anything about it. Feeling helpless, he felt that it would be better for him to move from Earth to this world. Later on, when this world had the concept of chemistry, he would let them study it. "I want to teach a few students," Rinpoche suddenly said when he found the Empress. The Empress was a little surprised. She didn't expect him to have such a thought. Wasn't he afraid of trouble the most? These thoughts were practically written all over the Empress's face. "There are some things that I have to do, but I don't even have enough time to spend on it. I feel that it's better to teach a few students so that I can relax in the future," Rinpoche said helplessly. Every day he had to spend half of his time practicing martial arts and doing all kinds of things. Rinpoche felt that his time was definitely not limited to 24 hours. At the very least he had much less time than others. The Empress first asked Hong Yuan and Qing Yuan to wait outside. After looking at Rinpoche for a long time, she said, "Actually, I have always had this thought. Great Xia, the Yun nation, and the Qin nation all have their own national academies. However, there was no such place in Dayo. Since you want to teach a few students, why don't you build an academy so that the Aboriginals can have a place to learn some things? Originally, I wanted to discuss this matter at a later time. Since you have brought it up, why don't we do it this way?" Rinpoche opened his mouth wide and was a little stunned. He only wanted to teach a few students so that they could help him do some things. Why did it suddenly become an academy? If it was a few days later, he might not necessarily object to it. However, he still had to practice martial arts every day. There was also the glass factory and the like. He also had to think about how to fill up the treasury of the palace. Where would he find the time? "Why, are you unwilling?" The Empress's expression changed in an instant. It wasn't ice cold but yearning. Her eyes were filled with expectation. These few years, Dayo has sent out many people, but they haven't been able to gain much. Even though the various officials in the imperial court have obtained some books from other nations, they aren't systematic and there is no one to teach them. As for the ordinary Aboriginals, it is already very difficult for them to learn words, let alone other things. You have told me before that knowledge is power. In your world, countless ordinary people are the foundation. The geniuses born among them lead the direction of the entire world. Only then can they reach that stage. However, it is too difficult for my Dayo to achieve this. As the Empress spoke, she got up from the couch and walked in front of Rinpoche. She stared straight into Rinpoche's eyes as if she wanted to see through his heart. "Only you can do this and let me see the scene that I want to see. In that case, are you willing to do this for me?" Her eyes were bright and her face was filled with expectation as she waited for Rinpoche's answer. This wasn't the first time Rinpoche saw such an expression. When he first arrived on Earth and looked at the brightly lit city, her expression was somewhat similar to this one. However, this was the first time the Empress showed such an expression to him. The distance between their faces was less than 10 centimeters. Rinpoche could feel the heat that was transmitted to his body when she breathed. He could also smell the fragrance that was coming from her. He could even see himself in her eyes, which made his heart beat faster. The direction that your gaze points to is the direction that I will advance in, Rinpoche said gently. Upon hearing this, the Empress revealed a rare bright smile on her face. Following which, she returned to the couch with a smile on her face and said, "That's settled then. You will be in charge of the new school. As for the name, let's call it. I will leave the honor of naming it to you." The Empress seriously considered for a while and realized that she actually couldn't think of a suitable name. She immediately handed over the responsibility of naming it to Rinpoche. Rinpoche looked at the Empress's triumphant expression and the smile at the corner of her mouth. Then he thought about her expression and tone that didn't match her character. He felt that the Empress had learned bad things from those period dramas. Indeed, he had opened the door to a new world for the Empress. However, they have to start from learning how to read, Rinpoche said bluntly. Originally, he wanted to translate the words from Earth into the words of this world. At this moment, he simply changed his mind and let them start from simplified Chinese. You can make the arrangements. I hope to see a batch of real talents emerge from it, the Empress said. I'll do my best. Rinpoche thought for a while. Those who had received basic education should be considered talents in Dayo. He would pick out a few who were smarter, quick-witted, and could accept new things to learn more things. They would then be his assistants. What about the students? How do we recruit them? Not all of the children in the imperial court are gifted. Those who aren't gifted will be sent to the school, the Empress said while scratching her chin. Rinpoche spread his hands. Just now, the Empress made it sound as if she had pinned all her hopes on this school. In the end, it would become a shelter for useless people. However, those who were gifted would definitely focus on practicing martial arts. After all, this world wasn't Earth. In the end, martial arts were still the most important. Even though martial arts couldn't solve all problems, it could solve most of them. Chapter 268. In the throne room, Tong Xinye, you old man, do you want to taste the sharpness of this old man's saber? Qin Chuan's eyes were like two copper bells, and his voice was so loud that it could lift the roof. Ever since he heard this from somewhere, everyone's ears had grown calluses. Master Qin, do you think I'm afraid of you? Last time at House Yunyan, I don't know who fell into the puddle afterward. Tong Xinye had a faint smile on his face. Many people burst out laughing. The last time they fought at the top of the brothel, both sides were supposed to be tied. In the end, Qin Chuan's wife shouted from below. At that time, Qin Chuan was caught unprepared and was kicked into a puddle in the neighboring courtyard by Tong Xinye. Qin Chuan regarded this matter as a great humiliation. He didn't expect that Tong Xinye would use this to provoke him at this time. He was so angry that his eyes turned red and he slammed into Qin Chuan. In an instant, there was almost an afterimage behind him. Qin Chuan was already prepared. He punched out with both fists, one above and one below. Just like that, the two of them started fighting in the throne room. The people around them were already used to this kind of thing. Lord Qin's Black Tiger Steel's heart move is really quick. Mr. Qin, it's Black Tiger Steel's heart again? Mr. Qin, it's still Black Tiger Steel's heart? Everyone nodded in disgust. If Rinpoche were here, his eyeballs would have popped out. Was Dayo's court assembly like this? Minister of War, what the hell are you doing with the words Black Tiger digging out heart, and Black Tiger digging out heart? And Tong Xinye, where are you kicking? There's even a kick to the groin? The Empress sat in the seat of honor with one hand resting on her chin. She was bored to death as she watched the two of them fight. She was thinking about Hua Qiangu, whom she had seen last night. After a long while, the Empress sat up slightly and looked to her left and right. Suddenly her eyes lit up. She picked up two red objects that were about 7 inches long, 3.5 inches wide, and 3 inches thick. She weighed them in her hand and then flew them toward the two of them with a whistling sound. You're right. Pah, pah. The two objects smashed into the two men's heads and immediately broke into pieces. The two men patted the dust off their heads and turned to look for the source of the hidden weapons. Then they cupped their hands and greeted, Your Majesty. Almost every time it would end like this. There's one more thing. I'm going to set up a school in the next few days. If there are any suitable descendants in your families, you can send them over. The Empress wiped her hands after throwing the brick away. Then she cupped her chin and said, Academy? Everyone was stunned. I've heard of academies, but the other 3 countries have them. However, this was the first time in Dayo. Your Majesty, who is in charge of the academy? Shi Qing asked as he shook his sleeves. Opening a school was a good thing, but who would teach them? Rinpoche, Deputy Prefect Ren, the Empress said faintly. Everyone was stunned for a moment, then asked, "Your Majesty, what kind of disciple do you want?" "Smart and quick-witted, don't be too old," the Empress said faintly. This was requested by Rinpoche. They were too old and difficult to teach. Their worldview had already been formed. However, they couldn't all be too young. If they were 7 or 8 years old, they would have to learn for 10 years before they could use them. It would be best if some of them were 15 or 16 years old. After 2 or 3 years of study they would be of use. As for the younger ones, we can slowly nurture them. After hearing the Empress's request, everyone nodded in agreement. They didn't know if Rinpoche had the ability to do so. Anyway, he had a lot of strange things in his hands. Since Her Majesty had spoken and the matter of the academy wasn't a big deal, everyone naturally wouldn't object. However, it was another matter if there were any suitable disciples in the family. At this point in time, Rinpoche had also seen the location of the academy. It was just beside the palace. On one side of the palace was a beast park and on the other side was a martial arts training ground. The main purpose was for the imperial guards to practice martial arts during their shifts. It was more than 200 meters long and 100 meters wide. There were many huge rocks like the ones Rinpoche saw Xiongpai playing with before. There were also various kinds of stone locks and some wooden stakes that were as thick as the mouth of a bowl and about 2 meters tall. Rinpoche saw an imperial guard that he had seen before standing 150 meters away with a bow. The guard shot an arrow and the wooden stake, which was as thick as the mouth of a bowl, broke into 2. This power was equivalent to that of a sniper rifle. There was an empty space beside this martial arts training ground. It was slightly smaller than the martial arts training ground. It had never been used and had long been overgrown with weeds. Next to this empty space was a forest. The location of the academy was this deserted empty space. Rinpoche walked one round here and had a plan in mind. In any case, there wouldn't be many students and he wouldn't have the time to teach even if there were more. He just had to build a courtyard and a few rooms. In Rinpoche's mind, 30 to 40 students would be enough. However, it was time to return to Earth. These things could be discussed after they returned. "Zixiao, let's go and rob," Rinpoche said to the Empress with a serious face. "Look, there's only 25,000 left." It had been 4 months since they had fled, but they had only been on Earth for slightly more than a month. The original 1 million yuan was worth more than 120,000 euros. Even though they didn't have many accommodations during this trip to Europe, the Empress still spent 100,000 yuan in 1 month. It was faster than what Rinpoche had expected. Furthermore, this was Milan, the famous fashion capital. He was afraid that the two of them would be penniless when they left this place. It was easy to find a target. He heard that there were many mafias in Italy. After hearing Rinpoche's words, the Empress seriously considered it. She hesitated for a moment between shopping and robbing. After about a second, she looked at Rinpoche and nodded, "Okay." Rinpoche almost laughed out loud. The serious expression on the Empress's face when she seriously considered this matter was really too interesting. "What are you laughing at?" The Empress squinted her eyes and looked at him. Robbing didn't give her any psychological burden. Today, a large portion of Daeyo's weapons were looted when they attacked the Yun nation in the early years. Needless to say, the entire Daeyo was looted. "I think it should be like this. Everything under the heavens belongs to the king. What belongs to them belongs to you, your majesty." Rinpoche had a serious look on his face. Saying it this way sounded more elegant. The Empress thought about it again. "Pa." Rinpoche looked at his pig-trotter-like hand with a hidden bitterness on his face. "Your majesty, when did you learn to fight like this?" The two of them weren't in a hurry to buy anything. Instead, they strolled around the city. The Roman, Gothic and Renaissance buildings that could be seen everywhere piqued their interest. When they arrived at the square of the Milan Cathedral, the Empress took a few more glances at the magnificent buildings in the distance. This kind of Gothic architecture always attracted people's attention at first glance. Under the blue sky, the cathedral, the square, the tourists on the square, and the pigeons that could be seen everywhere formed a beautiful picture. When the two of them walked on the square, a flock of pigeons flew past them. A big black man placed a handful of pigeon food in Rinpoche's hand. Immediately, a few pigeons flew towards Rinpoche as if they had found their target. One of them pecked at his hand. Rinpoche smiled and scattered the food in his hand. Immediately, a flock of pigeons flew around the two of them. A few people at the side couldn't help but take out their mobile phones to take pictures of the lady in red who was surrounded by pigeons. As for Rinpoche, he was treated as a backdrop. When the pigeons landed, the big black man stretched out his hand with a smile on his face and said, "Money." Rinpoche looked at him and laughed. This was the usual routine of these people. First, they would stuff a handful of pigeon food in your hand and let you enjoy the feeling of being surrounded by pigeons. Then they would ask for money. If you didn't give money, then very soon, 3 to 5 big black men would appear. Furthermore, these people mainly targeted people with yellow skin. Get lost. Rinpoche maintained his smile, but his tone was filled with contempt. He had already calculated that when the big black man's helpers arrived, he would take them down together. Then, he and the Empress would randomly find a remote place, and then these people would follow them and give them money. Although the money might not be a lot, the wealth of a millionaire was also accumulated over time. They couldn't just give up on picking up the pigeons just because they didn't have much money. After all, they had to specifically find suitable targets to rob. Now they just had to bend over and pick up the pigeons. Sure enough, after a whistle, four tall and strong big black men immediately surrounded the two of them. They were mumbling something and had a threatening expression on their faces. Rinpoche snapped his fingers, and the Empress looked at him with dissatisfaction. There are too many people and there are so many people watching. Rinpoche smiled shyly and pointed to the surroundings. They only felt a gust of wind blow past them. In the next second, the four of them cried out in pain and fell to the ground. No one present could see what exactly happened. The Empress's movements were too fast. Rinpoche timely put on a shocked expression and said, "You guys actually faked falling." However, just as he shouted this, he saw a few people take off their coats, revealing their police uniforms. Chapter 269. We are the federal police. May I ask if they threatened you? After a few Italian police officers surrounded them, one of them pointed at the people at his feet and asked Rinpoche. It was in Italian. Rinpoche was at a loss. He looked at the ID that the other party flashed and thought for a while. He should be saying that we have defeated someone and wants us to follow them to the police station? Which eye of his saw us hitting people? Rinpoche didn't know if he was talking to himself or to the Empress, but he sounded a little doubtful. Rinpoche knew his situation very well. Both of them did not even have passports and were burdened with cases. If they were to enter the police station, they would have no choice but to fight their way out. There was no need to enter the police station. With a few more questions from the police, the two of them would give themselves away. He would have to kill his way out sooner or later, so it was better to strike first and gain the upper hand. It was a pity that he had only been in Milan for half a day and had yet to take a look around. Damned fishing law enforcement. Rinpoche cursed in his heart. All of a sudden he leaped up and stomped his feet on the ground. In an instant he appeared in front of the police officer and gave him a tight slap on his ear. Rinpoche's current strength was around 330 kilograms, which was considered quite strong. That police officer did not even have the chance to groan before he was smashed to the ground like a wooden stake. The police officers were stunned by the sudden turn of events. What was going on? The rest of them hurriedly reached for their holsters, but before they could pull out their guns, they were all sent flying. The onlookers were also stunned. A middle-aged man in the crowd had a satisfied look on his face. He had sent people to monitor the route from the north to Milan, and sure enough, the two of them had arrived. He had guessed their route and destination, so he had come here in advance to wait for them. Knowing that the two of them were extremely vicious, he was afraid that they would get into trouble again. He even hired a few Italian police officers to help them clean up the mess. This was to prevent the two of them from escaping after committing a crime like they did in Japan. This could be considered as a sign of his sincerity. However, he had guessed the beginning correctly but not the ending. When he saw Rinpoche suddenly slap the police officer, the expression on his face froze in an instant. In the next second, the police officers were all lying on the ground, unconscious. He almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Don't you feel any pressure at all when you openly attack a police officer? Do you still have a little bit of conscience? Can you guys share the good stuff? Are you going to fight all over the world? Did they really think that the country was useless? Well, some countries in Europe were indeed incompetent. The middle-aged man looked like he was about to vomit blood. Seeing that Rinpoche and Gu Shijio were about to leave, he hurriedly chased after them and asked, "Can I have a word with you too?" Rinpoche and the Empress ignored him, turned around and left. The people around them made way for the two of them. That middle-aged man chased Rinpoche for half a street. Rinpoche suddenly stopped, and his hand was already on his waist. The middle-aged man was startled by Rinpoche's actions. He consciously raised his hands to show that he had no ill intentions and said, "I'm here to help you." Rinpoche pulled up his pants and grinned at him, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. "I'm here to help you. Can we talk?" I'm not representing myself. You know what I mean, the middle-aged man said quickly, afraid that the other party would lose their minds. I'm not free. Ren Bachien replied. If the two of you are worried about the Italian police, our men will take care of those police officers, the middle-aged man continued. When Ren Bachien heard this, he felt that it was somewhat interesting. They are the undercover agents that you planted here? Ren Bachien's face was full of vigor. The middle-aged man almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Recently we have done a lot of things to help you clean up the mess you left behind. Otherwise, do you think that the Japanese police wouldn't be able to find out about the two of you? The middle-aged man continued and pointed to a coffee shop by the roadside. The two of you, sit down and have a chat. Ren Bachien looked at the Empress, but she didn't care about this at all. Her gaze was focused in the distance. Ren Bachien followed her gaze and saw a bright display window. There was a floral skirt paired with a red top. All right, you look more pleasing to the eye than the previous few. Ren Bachien nodded. In any case, the other party had helped him clean up a lot of messes. Furthermore, he didn't have much money on hand. If they could come to an agreement, would he be able to transfer the 20 million yuan to Qingqing? After a while, the three of them sat in the coffee shop. Let me introduce myself first. My surname is Qin Shi, the middle-aged man introduced himself. At the same time, he sized up the two of them. Ren Bachien, male, 25 years old, Han Chinese, graduated from SY University, then worked at SY Zhongqing Trading Company for 8 months. All the information was clearly remembered in his mind. However, at this moment, Ren Bachien looked completely different from the delicate and slightly reserved young man in the photo. Compared to the photo, he was much more robust, bald, and gave off a very strange vibe. On one hand, he didn't seem to care much about anything. On the other hand, he gave off a very sharp vibe. At the same time, there was a little shadow of his previous self. As for the other person, Qi Zixiao, female, unknown. Other than her name and gender, everything else was unknown. It was as if she had popped out from a crack in a rock. After all, for a person like her, it was impossible to hide her looks, temperament, and strength. Especially when she was sitting there without saying a word, she gave off a little pressure. It was as if she was someone who held the power of life and death for a long time. It was impossible for such a person to have popped out from a crack in a rock. However, he couldn't find any information about her. It was a complete blank. It was these two people who had committed so many crimes in their country. After escaping to our nation, they didn't restrain themselves at all. Along the way they went sightseeing and committed murder after murder. In their eyes, human life was like grass. According to the recent investigation, a murder in Austria should be related to these two people. Oh. Ren Bachien nodded and stirred his cup with a small spoon. The Empress hugged her yogurt and slurped it in small mouthfuls. Qin Shi waited for a long time, but the two of them didn't have any intention to continue the conversation. He looked slightly helpless. Those Italian police officers just now were helping you, Qin Shi finally said. Oh, I thought they were arresting us, Ren Bachien said innocently. Qin Shi looked at Ren Bachien's innocent expression and felt his chest tighten. Couldn't you have asked more? There were so many people around. As long as you opened your mouth, someone would immediately tell you what they were talking about. Furthermore, I was standing right beside you. Who would have thought that you would make a move in front of so many people without saying a word? I knew that you would stir up trouble here. I specially bribed a few police officers to help me clean up the place. I was afraid that you would stir up trouble again, Qin Shi said with a sullen face. Ren Bachien nodded. He thought that the police and robbers had encountered a fishing expedition. However, you are disturbing me from picking up money. Seeing that Ren Bachien was indifferent and Qi Zixiao was focused on drinking yogurt, Qin Shi felt even more sullen. How much work have we done for you? Bribing the Italian police and interfering with our nation's investigation. We have done all these things that we shouldn't have done. Don't the two of you know what to do? If it was someone else, he would have already slammed the table. However, he really didn't dare to do so in front of these two people. The other party would definitely turn hostile and leave. He didn't know how long it would take to find them again. If he angered them, they would shoot him and continue to escape. He believed that they would definitely do such a thing. These two people were extremely daring. Chapter 270. Let's get down to business. Qin Shi cleared his throat and said seriously. Both of you aren't going to continue like this, are you? If not for someone helping you deal with the loose ends, I'm afraid both of you wouldn't be so relaxed now. The Empress sneered when she heard this. After staying in this world for so long, she really didn't think that anyone could do anything to her. Although there were indeed powerful weapons in this world, she wasn't a blockhead. Most importantly, if she wanted to kill someone who could escape. Most importantly, she didn't belong to this world at all. Qin sure knew what Qi Zixiao was thinking when he saw his expression, but he didn't mind. Instead he said, "Both of you think the country is too simple. Perhaps conventional means can't do anything to you, but there are many unconventional means. If necessary, for example, if our nation finds out that you are different, they may not use too much force, but other means are hard to defend against. For example, poisonous gas, chemical incapacitating agents, infrasonic weapons, there are too many. Now, it's no longer the world where individual strength is supreme. There are too many new weapons that are hard to defend against. Perhaps it's difficult to equip the entire army or use them on the battlefield, but it's possible to deal with a small number of targets. To put it simply, every bite of food you eat may contain something that can threaten you. For a cake like this, perhaps only the middle layer had a little bit of something. You won't even know how you got hit." The Empress stuffed the cake into her mouth expressionlessly. Rinpoche thought about it carefully. Part of what Qinshi said was right. One should not underestimate the power of a nation. The power that any nation could mobilize was unimaginable to them. However, other things were easier said than done. However, there was one thing. If there was an opportunity, he and the Empress would be in big trouble. Although there were a lot of people who fled and lived freely in other countries for decades, the premise was that the country didn't really care about them. If the country really cared about a person, then what Qinshi said might happen. One could be a thief for 1,000 days, but one couldn't guard against thieves for 1,000 days. It was impossible for him and the Empress to not relax at all, unless they ran to a desolate and uninhabited place. Then they had to be careful of a bomb that dropped from their heads. Of course, the Empress wasn't someone to be trifled with. If she wanted to kill someone, unless that person wasn't on Earth, no one could escape. Therefore both sides were afraid of each other. But the most important thing was that he wasn't prepared to keep floating outside. Previously they had no choice but to run away. If they had the chance to live a stable life, no one would choose to run away. In fact, he and the other party hit it off very well. Furthermore, I believe that there must be a reason behind your escape this time. Judging from your previous actions, you did not rely on your strength to challenge the law or affect social order. We've also investigated the Jin family and learned some of their style. There must be a reason why they appeared in your house. As for your temperament, we have more or less understood it, Qinshi said to Rinpoche. He did understand a little. In those cases in Japan, almost all of the victims were skinheads, ultranationalists, and almost all of them had various criminal records. If no one provoked the two of them would not make trouble out of nothing. However, if someone provoked the two of them, there was nothing they wouldn't dare to do. Just like what had been said before, their guts were boundless. At least that was the case before. If Qinshi hadn't found the two of them in Milan, he probably wouldn't have thought this way after a few days. Rinpoche looked at the other party's words. Since the other party had already built a ladder for him, of course he had to step down. He immediately put on an aggrieved expression. He was almost at the point of perfection in changing his expression. Who did I provoke at home? I stayed at home obediently, but trouble came from the sky. Not only did that Jin Jun rob me of my shares, but he also threatened me with my family. I was also forced to do so. What was that saying again? When an ordinary man gets angry, blood will splash 5 steps away. Then, you exterminated the entire Jin family. Qinshi smiled bitterly. This was really a case of an ordinary man getting angry. It's not like you don't know what kind of style they have. They had already threatened me with the lives of their family. When I saw this, if calling the police was useful, they wouldn't be alive and kicking. They are rich and powerful, while I am just a little b*tc. I thought about it and decided to sacrifice me for the happiness of thousands of families. Rinpoche had a look of, I didn't want to do this, but I had no choice. Qinshi was stunned when he heard this. This fellow really knew how to back down. However, it was much easier for him to speak this way. No matter what, murder is still a big crime. However, the nation is very interested in some of the things that you have shown and is willing to give you a chance. The Empress raised her eyebrows and squinted her eyes. Give me a chance. The table under her hand immediately broke into a pile of broken pieces, and everything on the table fell to the ground. When Rinpoche saw the Empress open her mouth, he knew something was wrong. He immediately retracted his leg and was unscathed. On the other hand, Qinshi was spilled with coffee all over his pants. Fortunately, the coffee wasn't too hot anymore. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. He was sweating profusely. The main reason he was sweating was because of the aura emitted by Qi Xiao just now. It made him unable to move, and his heart was beating wildly. It was as if it was about to explode. Before this, he had never thought that a person's aura could be so terrifying. "Boss, the quality of the table is too poor." Rinpoche turned his head and shouted. Qinshi was speechless. After a while, the three of them changed to another corner. "I remember that you said that you wanted to cooperate?" Rinpoche said faintly. Now, all the grievances on his face had disappeared. His expression was similar to that of the Empress, plain and a little cold. "It can also be considered a cooperation." Qinshi immediately changed the topic. This guy's expression really changed at a whim. "Tell me about the specifics," Rinpoche continued. "For example, some of the things in your hands, the laboratory of you and Qin Yan. I think you have other things in your hands that are very valuable. For example, the skills of this person. I'm very curious. Are there really legendary cultivators in this world? If so, can they be imparted to others? There are a lot of things that the nation is interested in. I think there are a lot of things that you can give up. In fact, they don't even affect you." At this point, Qinshi's eyes were a little fervent. Rinpoche gently tapped his fingers on the table. "In that case, what can we get? We can write off everything that happened in the past, suppress the domestic affairs and revoke the arrest warrant. However, there is a prerequisite. You can't act so recklessly and must abide by the law. At the same time, if you have any other requests, you can raise them. I will report to the higher-ups," Qinshi continued. Qinshi thought for a while and spoke again. "Also, did you say emperor, just now? I'm very curious about this person's identity." Just now the Empress said, "Give me a chance." In this half a day he had thought of all kinds of possibilities, but from the tone and the content of the words, he felt that it was emperor. He felt that there might be a huge secret behind it, and this made him a little excited. The Empress turned her head to look at Rinpoche, then turned her head to the other side to admire the oil painting on the wall. Rinpoche was silent for a while. Then he lowered his voice and slowly said, "Since you have sensed it, then I will say it directly. Actually, she is Wu Zetian. Back then she gave up the throne to cultivate. Now that she has returned from her cultivation, everything in the world has become smoke. However, she still has 1,000,000 soldiers. The nation will lend us 100 million first, and after we unfreeze the 1,000,000 soldiers." Qinshi looked as if he had eaten *T. Rinpoche pondered for a while. What should he do with 1,000,000 soldiers? He couldn't possibly rebel, right? These words couldn't be said carelessly. After that, we can make a Tang Dynasty terracotta army or something. Chapter 271. Forget about the 1,000,000-strong army. As for the rest, you can guess if I'm telling the truth. Rinpoche spread his hands and said. Qinshi's mind was filled with the word, emperor. Those who could say this word were either delusional or... He didn't dare to think about it. If it was someone else, he would have given them a slap. However, the Empress's strength made him overthink. After all, from the current information, the Empress's strength wasn't something a human could achieve. From the video, her speed was twice as fast as a human falling from the sky. It was hard to see her figure clearly and had to be played in slow motion. In other words, a normal person fell from the sky at about 23 meters per second, but she fell at more than 70 meters per second. That was a little more than a second to cover 100 meters. Imagine a person who was 100 meters away 1 second and appeared in front of you in the next. For an ordinary person, it was like teleportation, and they wouldn't be able to react within a short distance. Not to mention, the Empress didn't slow down after carrying Rinpoche. She stepped on the wall and leaped to another building that was 100 meters away. This showed that she was even more powerful. This kind of speed and jumping force wasn't something a human could achieve. Correspondingly, how strong was she? If she was a cultivator, Qinshi would believe it. If she was a cultivator, how long had she lived? What was her true identity? Qinshi didn't even dare to think about it. It was really terrifying to think about it. Rinpoche looked at Qinshi's grave face and was pondering the pros and cons of saying this. If the other party really thought that the Empress was a cultivator, it wasn't that he couldn't produce a secret manual. The secret manuals of Great Xiao were enough for them to chew on for a while. Moreover, the lifespan of an earth wheel expert would indeed increase. An earth embryo expert could live up to 100 years, and a spirit wheel expert could live up to 150 years. There was an even higher level above the spirit wheel realm, which was comparable to the Aboriginals' longevity heaven. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that it was a cultivation technique. At the same time, there was an advantage to saying this. which was that the things in his hands could be explained. Otherwise, there were many things that couldn't be explained. As for whether or not it would be exposed, it would have to wait until someone on Earth reached the spirit will realm. Ren Bachin believed that martial arts wouldn't be widely disseminated in a short period of time. Given the small number of people who practiced martial arts, it would take a long time for someone to reach the spirit will level. If Ren Bachin didn't remember wrongly, Great Xia's cultivation technique also required some rare treasures. Was there really someone on Earth who could reach the spirit will level? Moreover, he was not worried that someone on Earth would cultivate to an extremely high level. On the contrary, if Earth could really find a way to cultivate to a very high level, it was not necessarily a bad thing for him. Perhaps he could push himself to a higher level. Otherwise, he really doubted how far he would be able to go on his own. After all, he was unable to cultivate other techniques, and no one knew what the Rui visualization technique was like. Even though he could smoothly advance to the Earth wheel level, there was still a barrier after that. If he were to stop at the Earth wheel level, the lifespan of an Earth wheel expert was only 100 years. At the same time, because he had traveled between two worlds, due to the difference in the flow of time, his lifespan might be shorter than those who had always been in the other world. The Empress could live to 200 years old, and if she broke through to longevity heaven, she could live to 300 years old. This was very likely. As for whether this would pose a threat to him, he had never worried about this problem. He had the backing of a world, and he would also be rich and powerful on Earth. No matter how bad his situation was, it wouldn't be too bad. It was much better than if he were to stop at the Earth wheel level in the future. At the thought of this, he had an idea and was prepared to make a big lie. Of course, he had to do it bit by bit. No one would cherish things that came too easily. Qin Shi, who was sitting opposite him, pondered for a long time before raising his head and asking, "What other requests do you have? You can raise them all at once. I will report to the higher-ups together." Money. Give me 100 million euros first. I have no money to spend. If you didn't come, I was prepared to rob someone. Ren Bachin spread his hands on the table and finally spoke the truth. Qin Shi pondered for a while. When Ren Bachin ran away, he brought 1 million euros with him, which was only slightly more than 100,000 euros. If he was a little extravagant, it would be gone very quickly. How would the two of them make money after that? Work. To quote a famous saying, it was impossible to work, not even in this lifetime. If the two of them could find a place to work and earn money, he would tear off his head and kick it like a ball. In that case, he was afraid that it would really be like what the other party said. At the thought of this, Qin Shi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. These two people really made him speechless. Forget about 100 million. The country's money doesn't come from nowhere. I can help you settle the domestic affairs. You seem to have money with someone else, right? I don't even have money, how can I cooperate? Ren Bachin retorted. Qin Shi was speechless. He had to admit that the other party was really a bastard. He was representing the country. Could he not be so straightforward? What can you offer in exchange for cooperation? Qin Shi emphasized the word cooperation. Some rare and precious treasures. Ren Bachin pondered about the things from that world. Many of them should be considered rare and precious. After all, they were things from another world. As for whether they were rare or not, he could just change to something else. Furthermore, he still had a killer weapon, the elongation saber. Although this saber was a little weak and would break at the slightest touch, this didn't mean that the elongation saber was worthless. If it could be researched, imagine soldiers fighting with daggers and bayonets and suddenly growing 2 meters. Furthermore, with Earth's technology, they might not necessarily be able to research anything from it. For example, 1 kilogram of iron becoming 1 kilogram of iron? 1 kilogram of gold becoming 1 kilogram of gold? 1 barrel of oil becoming 2 barrels? If she is really an immortal cultivator, will the martial arts of immortality work? Qin Shi asked the question that he was most concerned about. You can't become fat in one go. As for cooperation, let's do it bit by bit. Ren Bachin didn't reject and left some hope for the other party. I need to report to the higher-ups. Please wait a moment. Qin Shi gestured to the two of them and stood up to leave. After he left, the Empress turned her head and asked, "Who is Wu Ziqian?" The only female empress in history, the most famous woman, and much more powerful than most men. Ren Bachin was spouting nonsense just now and hurriedly explained to the Empress now. I am myself. I don't need to impersonate anyone and no one can be compared to me. The Empress looked unhappy. If it was someone else, she would have smashed him into a meat patty. Of course. It's just that you can't tell them about your identity and they have no way of knowing. You are the most unique one. No one can be compared to you, be it in the past or in the future. Just like the words on the mirror, Rinpoche comforted her softly. The Empress naturally knew that her identity couldn't be revealed in this world. After hearing what he said, she ignored him and turned her dissatisfaction into appetite. She ordered another serving of dessert. After waiting for a while, Qinshi hurriedly returned. After sitting down, he said, "Someone wants to talk to you. The Europe trip hasn't ended yet." Rinpoche waved his hand. "A video call will do," Qinshi said. Rinpoche nodded. "Let's go to another place. At the same time, we also want to know how strong she is and how strong she is. After all, there are many things that we need to see with our own eyes before we can be at ease." Rinpoche looked at the Empress. Even though there wasn't much change in her expression, he could imagine that she was very unhappy. He moved closer to her and whispered, "Mortals, let me show you my strength. You should have this kind of thought." His breath tickled the Empress's ear and her body trembled a little. However, after hearing his words, she felt that it wasn't that hard to accept. She just felt that this sentence was indescribably shameful. Qinshi made a phone call first. After a while, when the three of them went out, there was already a car waiting outside. Before getting into the car, Rinpoche whispered to the Empress, "Don't use your full strength, just show a little bit of strength." The Empress waved her hand. She didn't need Rinpoche to say this. In fact, her other state was her true strength. Rinpoche didn't know about this and not many people knew about it. Hua Sanlu knew about it, but he was already dead. The 8 pavilion masters were dead as well. The 2 disciples who barely survived couldn't tell anything about the Empress's condition. After a while, everyone appeared outside the city at a remote place. After getting out of the car, Qinshi fiddled with his laptop for a while and pointed the screen at the 2 of them. On the other side of the screen was a middle-aged man wearing glasses. He looked very dignified, but he shouldn't be the main character. Rinpoche guessed that the main character was still at the back. "We want to take a look at the authenticity first, then we will discuss some issues," the middle-aged man said. The Empress and Rinpoche looked at each other. In a split second, the Empress appeared 50 to 60 meters away and lifted her leg. Boom! There was a rumbling sound. Even through the screen they could feel the ground trembling. The ground around the Empress, which was at least 200 to 300 square meters, was all cracked and the stones under the soil were protruding. Regardless of whether it was Qinshi, the other world, or the person on the other side of the screen, everyone was stunned. It was one thing to guess it, but another to see it with their own eyes. Regardless of whether it was appearing 50 to 60 meters away in a split second or the power of this kick, it was shocking. Especially the power of this kick. It didn't seem to cover a large area, but one had to remember that this was land. Normally, if this kick was very powerful, it would be like a pile driver directly nailing it into the ground. However, the Empress covered the entire area with her power and used it on a single surface. Furthermore, it wasn't a flat surface that was pressed down, but the ground was uprooted. Just the method of using this power was already beyond imagination. Chapter 272. On the other side of the screen, although Rinpoche could only see one person, there were actually many people watching this scene. It could be said that every one of them was a person of considerable status. After all, this matter was too important and might even affect the future of mankind. "Can I look at something else?" The bespectacled middle-aged man on the screen pushed his spectacles up and said slowly. Rinpoche sneered. In the next second, a gun appeared in his hand and he pointed it at Qinshi's head. "Sakama drenched in ketchup, do you want to see it?" The veins on Qinshi's forehead were throbbing. This guy really flipped out at the drop of a hat. The man on the screen was stunned at first, then his face turned angry. "We are willing to display our strength, but it doesn't mean that you can casually make requests. Are you waiting to see the performance? Do you want to perform a duet for you to see?" Rinpoche sneered. In a place where the screen couldn't be seen, a few people almost spat out their tea. This guy's mouth was a little too poisonous. However, such a reaction was very normal. After all, that woman might be a so-called immortal cultivator. It would be strange if she was easy to talk to. The difference in strength allowed her to completely look down on ordinary people. "Why don't we talk to someone else? The person behind you, at least show your face, right? Otherwise, I don't even know who I'm talking to, right?" Rinpoche asked again. After Rinpoche finished speaking, he waited for the response from the screen. In a faraway room, an old man put down his teacup and nodded to the person beside him. "Connect it." After a while the screen went dark. When it lit up again, the people and environment in the screen had changed. An old man sat on a chair and nodded slightly toward the screen. "Hello, big boss." Rinpoche put the gun behind him and immediately had a radiant look on his face. This was a real big boss. He had seen him on television more than once. "Mr. Rin, I don't know how you would like us to address you. Let's call you this first." The old man smiled. His voice was very slow and his tone was very amiable. "We have reached a consensus on the matter of cooperation. In that case, let's discuss on the basis of cooperation and seek common ground while reserving differences. We have some ideas and Mr. Ren, you should also have your requests. Both sides should state them. This is the basis of communication, right?" Rinpoche applauded. As expected of a big shot, the way he spoke was different. He immediately set the tone. "First of all, I want to ask a question. It doesn't affect our cooperation, but I want to understand something on the basis of our cooperation. Was there anyone else like Miss Chi? Is it just her or are there others?" Rinpoche thought about it and felt that the other party's question was very sharp. The problem affected a wide range of areas. If there was only the Empress, why wasn't there anyone else? Since she could do it, why couldn't others? If there really was a legendary immortal cultivator, how could there only be one person? If there were others, where were they? What was his relationship with the Empress? Would they appear? These answers could affect the other party's attitude and approach in many aspects of cooperation. At this point in time, there were still many people watching the screen from a place where Rinpoche couldn't see. They were carefully observing any of his subtle movements to determine some things. "It's not just one person," Rinpoche replied after careful consideration. As soon as he said that, many people's spirits were lifted. Some people who were watching him said, "It's almost true." They were all professionals, but they wouldn't say whether Rinpoche's words were true or false. Instead, they would say it was almost true or not to provide a reference. After all, observing a person's expression and some subtle movements couldn't really tell. This was especially true for those who had undergone specialized training. "What level is Miss Chi's strength at?" "It's considered high," Rinpoche replied. "Logically speaking, she should be at the top." However, he hadn't forgotten something. It was that the former emperor led a group of people and left after attaining longevity heaven. Why did they leave? Where did they go? Great Xia had been founded for 70 years. Logically speaking, the first emperor was still far from reaching the end of his lifespan. Were there still such people? Were they still alive? Rinpoche didn't know any of these. There were still many secrets in that world that he hadn't come into contact with yet. "It's almost true. Where are the others? How many people are there?" The old man in the video asked another question. At this point he was a little nervous. If these people appeared in this world, no one knew what kind of changes would occur. However, one thing was certain, and that was chaos. When many powerful people appeared in this world, would they abide by the laws? Even a fool would know that it was impossible. They would only abide by some of their own rules and wouldn't care about the laws of the world. "A paradise!" Rinpoche exclaimed. In fact, he suddenly felt that the so-called paradise in the Taoist classics might not be any different from the other world. However, there was a big difference. Even the Blessed Enclave had entrances and exits. The other world was related to the mystery of his travel. Although it was just a change of words, it already gave people a different feeling. After all, the paradise had always been associated with the so-called immortals. "It's almost true. It's almost false." Some people felt that Rinpoche's answer was more true, while others felt that it was false. However, more people felt that it was true. As for how many people there are, you don't have to think too much about it. They won't come here. This is because it's very difficult for them to come here and they need to fulfill an important condition. I don't need to say anything else. Rinpoche's words were all true, but he concealed some things. "It's almost true. In that case, can ordinary people go to the so-called paradise?" No. Following that, the other party asked a lot of questions about the paradise, the cooperation between the two parties, and a question that everyone was very concerned about, whether the so-called martial arts could really help one live forever. It's impossible to live forever, but it's possible to prolong one's life. When one's cultivation reaches a certain level, one can live for 200 to 300 years or even longer. Rinpoche's words made many people excited. Lifespan had always been the instinctive pursuit of intelligent life. With today's technological progress, there might be more ways to prolong one's life in 200 to 300 years. In that case, what request do Mr. Ren and Madam Chi have? The old man finally asked. In fact, he still had some questions, but they weren't urgent and could be answered slowly in the future. He needed to digest and think about the content of this conversation. This isn't urgent. First, withdraw the wanted order and then borrow 100 million euros. I'm out of money. Ren Baqin was excited. After talking for so long he could finally ask for money. The old man's gaze froze for a moment and then he laughed. The country's money belongs to the country. It's the people's tax money, not an individual's. The bank can grant you some loans, but remember that you have to pay them back. The old man smiled. Let's put this aside for the time being. When will Mr. Ren return to China? Come to XX with Madame Qi and have a meal. My Europe tour hasn't ended yet. Ren Baqin had been a little wild recently and wasn't in a hurry to return. In that case, let's wait for your early return. After all, there's still a lot to discuss about the cooperation. The old man nodded. Why are you going back for the new year? Ren Baqin said. He didn't go back for the new year last year. This year, his parents were so worried that he had to go back for the new year. When the laptop screen turned black, Ren Baqin turned to look at Qin Shi and asked, how do we get a loan? By the way, help us apply for passports. We need them urgently. Chapter 273. Papa Ren's hands trembled slightly when he saw the familiar name on the screen. Hello, Dad, I'm going back at the end of the year. Ren Baqin's voice came from the other end of the phone and surprised him. He was shocked by the content. It's good to know that you are fine. Be well outside and don't call home, Papa Ren said in a trembling voice. Even after such a long time, he still felt as if he had been struck by lightning when he recalled the news he had just heard. It's all right, don't overthink it. I'm not a wanted criminal anymore. Ren Baqin laughed heartily. What happened? Papa Ren was shocked. Wasn't he wanted for murder? Ren Baqin replied in a deep voice, actually, I'm a spy. At that time, the police needed information on a criminal gang, and I happened to have dealings with them because of something. Of course it wasn't illegal. So the police found me and I thought it wasn't too dangerous, so I became an undercover police officer. Now that the gang has been destroyed, I'm clean. Ren Baqin's words stunned Papa Ren. Really? Papa Ren didn't want to think about some of the loopholes in his words. The so-called finding Ren Baqin because he had dealings with them sounded wrong. But he was still willing to believe that what his son said was true. Of course it's real. Otherwise would I dare to go back? Ren Baqin replied. That's great, that's great. Papa Ren's lips were trembling and he didn't know what to say. Ren Baqin felt a little guilty. It's okay. I'll go back in 2 months. Where are you now? Papa Ren couldn't help but ask. After so long he finally dared to ask this question. I'm traveling in Europe. Wait, I'll show you the video. Ren Baqin then turned on the video and let Papa Ren look at the scenery outside the window. Come back soon. Your mother and I are very worried about you, Papa Ren couldn't help but say as he looked at the exotic buildings outside. Understood. Go back as soon as possible and tell Mom not to worry, Ren Baqin said. There won't be any more danger, right? Papa Ren asked again. He only hung up the phone after getting a definite answer. Ren Baqin kept his phone and turned around. The Empress was sitting on the sofa not far away from him, flipping through a fashion magazine. Although she couldn't understand it, she could look at the pictures. At this moment, the two of them were in a hotel suite arranged by Qin Shi. After a whole day, their passports and a brand new bank card were sent over. At this moment, there was really nothing else to do. They just had to wait for the two of them to return to China before they could start working together. The Empress suddenly raised her head and said, You seem to be lying all the time recently. In the past 2 days, she had suddenly discovered this problem, and it made her a little conflicted. People used to call me an honest and cute little husband. However, after I gave my only sincere heart to someone, I can't take it out anymore, Ren Baqin said with a straight face. He sighed in his heart. Back then, people really called him an honest and cute little husband. That is my lost youth as well as running under the setting sun. Ren Baqin's words made the Empress's heart beat a little faster. Every time this fellow said these words, it was always like this. In that case, let's go. Ren Baqin bowed slightly and extended his hand in an inviting gesture. 2 days later, on the basis of friendly cooperation between both parties, Qin Shi had a bitter look on his face as he arranged for someone to specially deal with the shopping bags in the suite of Ren Baqin and the Empress. After Ren Baqin and the Empress left the room, they disappeared without a trace. No one was able to track the two of them at all. Ren Baqin and the Empress saw their surroundings change, and they were already in Yangxin Palace Hall. Light shone in through the door. Beside the Empress's wooden couch were 2 floor lamps that were also emitting light. However, the hall was still a little dim. The Empress released Rinpoche's hand and returned to the couch. She lazily lay on it and looked around. The change between the two worlds, the relaxed feeling in that world, and the desolate feeling after returning had also affected her. That relaxed feeling hadn't subsided, and she didn't want to stay here for a while. Pour me some wine. With pleasure. Rinpoche chuckled and put down the 2 barrels in his hands. One barrel was ammonia water, and the other barrel was silver nitrate, which was specially used to make silver mirrors. As for the other things, they could be obtained in this world, but it was slightly more troublesome. However, this world had to nurture basic physics and chemistry. Otherwise, a lot of things couldn't be done and they couldn't bring everything from Earth. Since he went in and out of Yangshin Palace Hall every day, he knew where the wine was kept. He went straight to the wine pot and returned with a wine cup to pour the Empress a cup. Seeing the Empress drink the wine in one gulp, Rinpoche filled it up again. "Drink with me," the Empress said. Rinpoche poured himself a cup, gestured for her to drink it, and the wine flowed down her esophagus and into her stomach like a knife. He went to the side, opened his laptop, searched for a bit and played a canon. The slow sound of a piano played and a warm atmosphere grew in the hall. After drinking another cup of wine, Rinpoche stretched out his hand and said, "Your Majesty, do you want to dance? I saw it at the restaurant yesterday." Rinpoche was referring to the scene at the restaurant yesterday, where the 2 of them witnessed a couple proposing. Everyone at the scene gave their blessings and applause, and the restaurant played the canon at the right time. In their joy, the couple danced along with the music. Rinpoche still hadn't forgotten that scene. The Empress's eyes curved and she was a little moved. This music could really touch people's hearts. She was also a little hesitant. She had never done such a thing before, and her identity made her disdain doing such things. Rinpoche took a step forward, held the Empress's fingers and said, "Why don't you try it and see what it feels like?" The 2 of them stood facing each other. The Empress and Rinpoche were about the same height, and they could look straight into each other's eyes. Rinpoche put one hand on the Empress's shoulder and the other on her waist. A warm and soft touch was transmitted to his palm, causing his heart to flutter. This was the first time he and the Empress were so intimate. The Empress felt a man's hands on her body. She was a little nervous and all the hair on her body stood up. A completely unfamiliar feeling that she had never felt before attacked her heart. "Don't be nervous. The first step is like this, the second step is like this, and the third step." Rinpoche comforted the Empress softly. However, the Empress became even more nervous. Such an intimate action and the warmth from his hands made her feel as if an elephant was ramming in her heart, and her ears turned red. She felt that she had never been so clumsy before. The confidence of the 5th most powerful expert in the world had disappeared. At this moment, the Empress looked over Rinpoche's shoulder and saw Qin Yuan and Hong Yuan at the door with their mouths wide open. Feeling nervous, the Empress subconsciously exerted a little force. Bang! Rinpoche flew out and landed on the wall of Yangshin Palace Hall. An hour later, when Rinpoche woke up, he found himself lying on the bed in Pingle Park. His whole body was in pain and his head was hurting as well. It was as if he had suffered a serious injury. "Since you are awake, have a good rest. Don't move around for the next 2 days," the Empress said faintly as she sat on a stool not far away. Following which, she left in a hurry as if she was escaping. Rinpoche wanted to touch his head, but just as he was about to exert force, he felt a burst of pain on his back, causing him to break out in cold sweat. What exactly happened? Rinpoche was at a loss. How did he end up like this? After carefully recalling for a long time, he remembered that he had just returned from Milan with the Empress and drank 2 glasses of wine with her. After that, he couldn't remember how he ended up like this. Even if I drank too much, it shouldn't be as if I was stepped on by an elephant, right? What exactly happened? Chapter 274. Those who have read 264 before can watch this again. Previously, I thought of a plot and casually added it. It was indeed inappropriate. After revising it, I posted this. I repeat, it's 264,264,264. Papa Ren's hands trembled slightly when he saw the familiar name on the phone. "Hello, Dad, I'm going back at the end of the year." Rinpoche's voice came from the phone and surprised him. He was surprised by the content. "It's good to know that you're fine. Be well outside and don't call home," Papa Ren said with a trembling voice. Even after such a long time, he still felt like he was struck by lightning when he thought of the news he just heard. "I'm fine. Don't think too much. I'm not a wanted criminal anymore. Ren Bachin laughed heartily. What happened? Papa Ren was shocked. Wasn't he wanted for murder? Ren Bachin said in a deep voice, actually I was undercover. At that time, the police needed information on a criminal gang. However, I happened to have dealings with them because of a certain matter. Of course it wasn't illegal. Therefore the police found me. I considered that it wasn't dangerous and became undercover. Now that the gang has been destroyed, I've cleared my name. Ren Bachin's words stunned Papa Ren. Really? Papa Ren didn't want to think about the loopholes in his words. The so-called finding of Ren Bachin because he had dealings with them felt wrong. However, he was still willing to believe what his son had said. Of course it's true. Otherwise how would I dare to go back? Ren Bachin said. That's great, that's great. Papa Ren's lips trembled and he didn't know what to say. Ren Bachin felt a little guilty. It's fine. I'll go back in 2 months. Where are you now? Papa Ren couldn't help but ask. After so long he finally dared to ask this question. Traveling in Europe. Wait, I'll video you. Ren Bachin then played the video and let Papa Ren look at the scenery outside. Come back soon. Your mother and I are very worried about you, Papa Ren said as he looked at the exotic buildings outside. Understood. Go back as soon as possible. Tell my mother not to worry, Ren Bachin said. There won't be any more danger, right? Papa Ren asked again and hung up after getting a definite answer. Ren Bachin kept his phone and turned around. The Empress was sitting on the sofa not far away from him, flipping through a fashion magazine. Although she couldn't understand it, she could look at the pictures. At this moment, the two of them were in a hotel suite arranged by Chen Shi. After a whole day, their passports and a brand new bank card were sent over. At this moment, there was really nothing else to do. They just had to wait for the two of them to return to China before they could start working together. The Empress suddenly raised her head and said, You seem to be lying all the time recently. In the past 2 days she had suddenly discovered this problem, and it made her a little conflicted. People used to call me an honest and cute little husband. However, after I gave my only sincere heart to someone, I can't take it out anymore, Ren Bachin said with a straight face. He sighed in his heart. Back then people really called him an honest and cute little husband. That is my lost youth as well as running under the setting sun. Ren Bachin's words made the Empress's heart beat a little faster. Every time this fellow said these words, it was always like this. In that case, let's go. Ren Bachin bowed slightly and extended his hand in an inviting gesture. Pa. Ren Bachin was speechless. 2 days later, on the basis of friendly cooperation, Chen Shi resentfully arranged for someone to handle the shopping bags in the suite that Ren Bachin and the Empress were staying in. After leaving the room, Ren Bachin and the Empress disappeared without a trace. No one was able to track the two of them at all. Ren Bachin and the Empress saw their surroundings change, and they were already in Yangxin Palace Hall. Light shone in through the door. Beside the Empress's wooden couch were 2 floor lamps that were also emitting light. However, the hall was still a little dim. The Empress released Ren Bachin's hand and returned to the couch. She lay on it lazily and looked around. The change between the two worlds, the relaxation in that world, and the coldness after returning had also affected her. That relaxed feeling hadn't faded and she didn't want to stay here for a while. Pour some wine for me. With pleasure. Ren Bachin chuckled and put down the 2 buckets in his hands. One of the 2 buckets was ammonia and the other was silver nitrate, which was specially used to make silver mirrors. As for the other things, they could be obtained in this world, but it was slightly more troublesome. However, this world had to develop basic physics and chemistry. Otherwise, a lot of things couldn't be done and they couldn't bring everything from Earth either. After going in and out of Yangxin Palace Hall every day, Ren Bachin knew where the wine was kept. He went straight to the wine jug and returned with a wine cup to pour the Empress a cup. Seeing the Empress drink the wine in one gulp, Ren Bachin filled it up again. Drink with me, the Empress said. Ren Bachin poured himself a cup, motioned for her to drink it, and the wine flowed down her esophagus and into her stomach like a knife. He went to the side, opened his laptop, searched for a bit and played a canon. The slow sound of a piano played and a warm atmosphere grew in the hall. After drinking another cup of wine, Ren Bachin stretched out his hand and said, Your Majesty, do you want to dance? I saw it at the restaurant yesterday. Ren Bachin was referring to the scene at the restaurant yesterday, where the two of them witnessed a couple proposing. Everyone at the scene gave their blessings and applause, and the restaurant played the canon at the right time. In their joy, the couple danced along with the music. Ren Bachin still hadn't forgotten that scene until now. The Empress's eyes curved. She was a little moved. This music could really touch people's hearts. She was also a little hesitant. She had never done such a thing before, and her status made her disdain doing such things. Rinpoche took a step forward, held the Empress's fingers and said, "Why don't you give it a try and see how it feels?" The two of them stood facing each other. The Empress and Rinpoche looked about the same height, and they could look straight into each other's eyes. Rinpoche put one hand on the Empress's shoulder and the other on her waist. A warm and soft touch was transmitted to his palm, causing his heart to flutter. This was the first time he and the Empress were so intimate. The Empress felt a pair of men's hands on her body. She was a little nervous and all the hair on her body stood on end. She had never felt this way before and it was a completely unfamiliar feeling. Don't be nervous. The first step is like this, the second step is like this, and the third step. Rinpoche comforted the Empress softly. However, the Empress became even more nervous. Such an intimate action and the warmth from his hands made her feel as if an elephant was ramming around in her heart. Her ears had also turned red. She felt that she had never been so clumsy before. The confidence of the fifth most powerful expert in the world had completely disappeared. At this moment, the Empress looked over Rinpoche's shoulder and saw Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan at the door with their mouths wide open. The Empress was nervous and subconsciously exerted a little force. Bang! Rinpoche immediately flew out and stuck to the wall of Yangxin Palace Hall. An hour later, Rinpoche woke up and found himself lying on the bed in Pingle Park. His whole body was in pain and his head was aching as well. It was as if he had suffered a serious injury. "Since you are awake, rest well. Don't move around for the next 2 days," the Empress said faintly from a stool not far away. Following which, she left in a hurry as if she was escaping. Rinpoche wanted to touch his head, but just as he was about to exert force, he felt a burst of pain on his back, causing him to break out in a cold sweat. What exactly happened? Rinpoche was at a loss. How did he become like this? After carefully recalling for a long time, he remembered that he had just returned from Milan with the Empress. Then he drank 2 glasses of wine with the Empress. After that, he couldn't remember how he became like this. Even if I drank too much, it shouldn't be as if I was stepped on by an elephant, right? What exactly happened? Chapter 275. After lying in bed for 2 days and using a lot of precious herbs, Rinpoche was finally able to get up and move around. Up until now, he still didn't know what exactly happened, but he knew the condition of his body. Many bones in his back and shoulder blades were cracked, and he almost had a concussion. It seemed like he was hit by a truck. But how could there be a truck in Yangxin Palace Hall? The only person who could do it was the Empress. However, when he asked this question, the Empress avoided it and even her ears turned red. This made him even more curious about what happened that day. If he said that he angered the Empress after drinking and was beaten up by her, why did her ears turn red? She would only behave like this when she was shy. But what exactly happened? If he couldn't figure it out, he didn't want to think about it. The Empress wouldn't tell him either. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan should know, but they didn't say anything either. Even if he racked his brains, he wouldn't have thought that he would dance with the Empress, let alone cause a murder. When he was able to move a little, he asked someone to carry him to the empty space next to the training ground beside the palace and told the people from the Ministry of Works about his plans for a school. In fact, it was just to erect a wall and build a few houses. In addition to the 3 houses for school, there was also a library for books and reading and a laboratory. However, the first thing to do was to build the 3 houses. The rest could be done slowly. After another 2 days, Rinpoche was finally able to move by himself. Although his body was still in pain, it wasn't a big deal. This world was indeed unique in terms of medicine, whether it was the black mud cream or the medicine this time. With his previous injuries, he would probably need at least a month to walk on Earth. 100 days to recover from a serious injury wasn't an exaggeration. When they returned to Earth, the two of them went directly to Spain and stayed there for 3 days. In fact, there was a place in Spain that Rinpoche wanted to see. It was Barcelona's Celestial Beach. In the past, he only heard about it on the internet and always wanted to see it. However, the weather wasn't right and the Empress was beside him. The Empress almost flipped the table when she saw the bikini. If she saw Celestial Beach, Rinpoche felt that he wouldn't have a good ending. You won't die if you don't court disaster. Rinpoche deeply agreed with this wise saying of the ancients. This time, Rinpoche brought along a set of glass laboratory utensils and glucose. Then he headed straight to the glass factory with his imperial bodyguards. As soon as he arrived at the glass factory, a burly man greeted him, "Sir Ren." This burly man was called Jiao Zhua, and he had been working for the imperial family. Previously, when the glass factory was being built, Ren Baqin and the empress wanted him, and he was finally assigned to this position. This person had followed the caravan to the Yun nation and Dayo a few times and was literate. Furthermore, he was one of the few ancient race members who were more cautious and meticulous. He would be a pretty good helper. Of course, this cautiousness and meticulousness was only relative. In the beginning it caused a lot of trouble. However, things had gotten better recently. How have you been recently? Is the color of the glass gone? Ren Baqin asked after getting off the horned cow. Sir Ren, I was just about to report that the color of the glass is much lighter than before. I reckon that we will be able to produce colorless glass very soon, Jiao Zhua said with a joyful look on his face. Let's go take a look. Ren Baqin nodded slightly. A moment later he saw a flat piece of glass placed in a room. Part of it was green in the past while the other part was green now. Comparing the two pieces, one could see that the color was much lighter. Well done. Ren Baqin nodded. It's what I should do. Jiao Zhua grinned. Have you made the molds that I asked you to make? Ren Baqin asked. Yes, and I have tried to make some of them. Jiao Zhua opened the box at the side and revealed some glass cups. They were all classical cups and goblets, and their color was also a little green. Sir, if we bring these things to the Yun nation in Great Xia, they can be sold for a high price, Jiao Zhua said with a smile. Ren Baqin picked up two of them and looked at them carefully. He shook his head slightly and said, they are still a little rough. The thickness of the walls and the bottom of the cups aren't very uniform. Remake the molds and get the best craftsmen. Got it, sir. Jiao Zhua had a look of regret in his eyes. He felt that the ones in the box were pretty good. However, they still weren't up to standard for Deputy Prefect Ren. Following which, Ren Baqin moved the box that contained the glassware out and found a room to conduct the silver mirror reaction experiment. When Jiao Zhua saw the glassware that Ren Baqin took out, he finally understood why Ren Baqin didn't like the glass cups that they made. The color of the bottles and jars that Ren Baqin took out was pure and transparent. There were almost no flaws, and the glass cups that they made could not be compared to them. For the next few days, Ren Baqin would go to the glass factory every day. Every day he would use those glass bottles and jars to conduct experiments in that small room. He would mumble words like sodium hydroxide, silver nitrate, ammonia, and so on that no one could understand. From time to time he would kick the wall in frustration. Bah! Hearing the angry screams from inside, the imperial bodyguards outside were already used to it. In any case, no matter what Ren Baqin was doing inside, they just didn't let anyone in to disturb him. After spending a few days and experiencing dozens of failures, Ren Baqin finally completed the silver mirror reaction experiment. For most people, this experiment could be completed in 2 hours. When he looked at the palm-sized mirror in his hand, his face was filled with joy. His chemistry teacher could finally rest in peace in the netherworld. After the first time, the second time would be much easier. Ren Baqin called a few craftsmen over and taught them how to make the silver mirror step by step. In the afternoon, cries of, "Ah!" and, "Why are you guys as stupid as pigs?" could be heard coming from the room again. "Sir, what's a pig?" someone asked. "Return to the city." Ren Baqin stormed out of the room with blue veins popping out on his forehead. "Lu Pinghai should be here in the next few days, right?" A handsome young man dressed in embroidered clothes asked while riding on a horse. "Young master, this is the news," a middle-aged man with a long spear on his back replied. Looking at the young man beside him, there was a trace of regret in his eyes. The last descendant of the Yu family was actually a cripple in terms of cultivation. Unless he could get his hands on Lu Pinghai's spirit yuan pill. It was just that he didn't know if the item that he brought this time would make him relent. "I will definitely succeed. Even Lu Pinghai will be tempted by this item. I will get the spirit yuan pill and take back what belongs to me," the young man said with a smile. In his eyes, there wasn't a trace of doubt on whether he could succeed or not. "Everything that happened was God's way of training for me. I will definitely succeed. I will return the disdain and supercilious looks that those people gave me one by one. Uncle Ping, it has been hard on you all these years. If it wasn't for your kindness to the Yu family, I'm afraid I wouldn't be alive today," the young man sighed. "It's my duty," the man addressed as Uncle Ping replied. "You're an Earth Embryo Realm expert and yet you're guarding a cripple like me. You don't know how many people are secretly cursing you," the young man said with a smile. If it wasn't for Uncle Ping, he wouldn't even be able to keep the last things that belonged to the Yu family. Uncle Ping smiled and didn't reply. When the two of them reached the outskirts of the village, the young man stopped and looked at it. It's really shabby. Then he turned to look at the forest at the side. That was where the grave of Lu Pinghai's best friend, was. At this moment, Uncle Ping's expression suddenly changed. Young master, be careful. Before he finished his sentence, he had already appeared in front of the young man at lightning speed. The long spear on his back was already held horizontally in his hand, deflecting 2 incoming arrows. Ah! A surprised sound came from the forest. Then 2 burly men who looked exactly the same walked out from the forest. You're the third batch. Aboriginals. Uncle Ping's expression changed. The other party should have the same purpose as him. As for the other party saying that he was the third batch, there was no need to ask about the whereabouts of the previous 2 batches. Do you want to do it or should I? The 2 Aboriginal men looked at each other. Rock, paper, scissors. Uncle Ping's face turned red. No matter what, he was still an Earth Embryo Realm expert. When had he ever been humiliated like this? Come. The limit is 10 moves. If you don't die, I'll let you go. One of the burly men walked out with an expression as if he had won a prize. He looked at the broadsword in the other party's hand. It looked like the standard broadsword of Dayo, but it was longer and thicker. Young master, step back first, Uncle Ping said in a deep voice. He didn't doubt the other party's words. Once the Aboriginals made a promise, they wouldn't go back on it. As long as he could withstand 10 moves from the other party, he was still confident in his strength. The other party had underestimated him. He had a move that had never failed before. Those who had seen it before were all dead. Unfortunately, there were 2 opponents this time and he could only use that move once. 2 minutes later, the burly man spat at the corpse in front of him. Then he punched the sorrowful young man to death. He then dragged the 2 corpses into the forest. What's this? It looks like something good. A voice came from the forest. Keep it. I'll show it to the great general when I get back. Chapter 276. In the Eastern Sea, an old man in green robes stopped outside a small fishing village. The old man had nothing on him other than a flute at his waist and a jar of wine in his hand. Looking at the somewhat dilapidated village, the elder's gaze was filled with sorrow and nostalgia, as well as reminiscing about the years that had passed. In the blink of an eye, so many years had passed. I'm afraid that in a few years this village will no longer exist. The old man stood outside the village for a long time before turning around and walking towards a small forest nearby. However, he had only taken a few steps when he stopped. Come out, the old man said in a deep voice. As soon as the old man's voice fell, 2 men wearing coarse clothes walked out from the small forest in front of them. They had the same face, the same height, the same sturdy body, the same bald head, and the simple expression on their faces. Just by looking at their faces, they gave people the impression that they were simple men from the mountains. However, the long sabers on their shoulders gave them an austere aura. 8th in the world, Lu Pinghai. We 2 brothers have been waiting for you for a long time. The 2 of them spoke at the same time, their voices somewhat muffled. Lu Pinghai looked at the 2 of them without moving his brows. Aboriginals rarely appeared in the other nations, but they had specifically come here. It was unknown whose orders they were under. His Majesty said that he wants to exchange a primary spirit elixir with you. You can name your conditions, the 2 continued. True enough. Lu Pinghai suddenly realized that it was Qi Zixiao. Tell Qi Zixiao that I don't want anything. You can go back. Lu Pinghai shook his head. Her Majesty said that if you don't agree, she will look for you personally, the 2 of them said. The Empress actually said that if Renbaqian didn't agree, she would beat him to death. But if he said that, Lu Pinghai would probably turn hostile on the spot. No matter what, he was still ranked 8th in the world. How could he allow others to threaten him like this? Then let Qi Zixiao come and find me. Lu Pinghai laughed and walked past the 2 of them, not even sparing them a glance. Although Qi Zixiao was ranked 5th in the world and there was also Hong Wu who was ranked 9th in the world, he was not afraid of them. As the 8th most powerful expert in the world, he definitely had his own confidence. If they hadn't fought, who knew what would happen? Qi Zixiao was originally ranked 7th, but didn't he also kill the 5th Hua Sanlu? How could he not have any trump cards? Lu Pinghai, do you really want to offend His Majesty for a primary spirit, Dan? Both of them turned around, their hands already on their blades. Although Qi Zixiao is powerful, she won't make me hand over my things just because of her words. Today, for Qi Zixiao's sake, I'll let you 2 leave. Don't act recklessly. Lu Pinghai coldly snorted and swung his sleeves behind him. Immediately, his sleeves extended several meters like snakes and coiled around the hilts of the two sabers. Clang. The two of them unsheathed their long sabers and slashed at their sleeves. However, a sudden force came from the sleeves and pushed the sabers away. The two long sabers slashed at their own necks. Roar. The two of them lowered their heads at the same time, their blades crisscrossing as they slashed at each other's sleeves. However, they missed. The sleeve loosened its grip on the saber hilt as if it was a living thing, then heavily struck the two men's chests. The two men could not help but fall back. They only stopped after retreating 7 or 8 steps. Blood flowed from the corner of their mouths. Lu Pinghai was surprised. Even an expert who had just attained the spirit wheel level wouldn't be able to withstand such an attack, let alone a direct hit on their chests. Yet the two of them were still standing there. The Aboriginals really had a lot of experts, and they were already this strong with just 2 people sent out. It's not easy to cultivate. I'll let you 2 off today. Lu Pinghai left these words and disappeared into the forest. The 2 men looked at each other, turned around and left. Since the 2 of them were no match for him, they had to go back and tell the general about Lu Pinghai's rejection. Lu Pinghai entered the forest, went straight to his residence and finally sat down in an open space. His old friend had lived here for decades, but now he couldn't even find his grave. However, this was also good since no one would disturb him. He knew where Rinpoche lived even with his eyes closed. I'm back to see you again? Lu Pinghai opened the wine gourd, drank a mouthful and sprinkled a little on the ground. He looked at the silver mirror in his hand and then at the craftsman and Jiao Zhuo in front of him. How many days did it take for you to make this silver mirror? How stupid are you? Even a dark-faced man is smarter than you. A dark-faced man was a nickname for a wild boar. 2 days. Rinpoche squinted at the craftsman who answered him. Even a black-faced man would be able to make these things in 2 days. The craftsmen lowered their heads and listened to him quietly. A row of tall and burly men stood there with their heads lowered like a wall. Rinpoche nagged for a long time before finally saying, each of you will be rewarded with 10 taels of silver and your monthly allowance will be increased by 1 level. Even though these people were hopelessly stupid, they still managed to do it. They should be scolded and rewarded. Thank you, sir. Everyone immediately put on a smile. 10 taels of silver was equivalent to more than 2 months of their monthly allowance. Furthermore, their monthly allowance would be increased by 1 level, which was a lot of money. All of you may leave. Rinpoche let the craftsman leave first and then instructed Jiao Zhuo on the main tasks. At this moment, the most important ones were concave and flat mirrors, which were used to make solar furnaces. After these were completed and the Mount Damo iron ore mine was settled, they could then sell it to other countries through caravans to make money. For the next period of time, Rinpoche woke up in the morning and went to the glass factory. At noon he returned to the palace and practiced martial arts in the afternoon. After the problems with the glass and silver plating were solved, the next step was much smoother. Even though the production speed of the glass factory wasn't fast, it was much faster than when they first started. The ratio of the materials had also been found, and the number of problems had decreased. After a week, the concave and silver mirrors had already filled 2 rooms. Next, Rinpoche led the craftsmen to the glass factory every day to use wood and rattan to make square shelves. The shelves were also concave. Then the mirrors were fixed on the shelves. A few days later, in the afternoon, a convoy of more than 100 people majestically left Lan City and headed straight for the glass factory outside the city. However, they didn't enter the newly built brick building. Instead, they went to an open space beside the glass factory. At this moment, there was a wooden platform there. On top of the platform, there was a huge shelf that was 6 meters tall and 12 meters wide. On top of the shelf were concave mirrors. From a distance, it was dazzling and blinding. Many people covered their eyes with their hands to block the white light. The empress came down from the carriage. Behind her were Shi Qing, Zhizhihai, Tu Wan, Tong Jinye, Qin Xuan, and the other high-ranking officials from the 6 ministries. As long as they were free, they were pulled over by the empress. Everyone was guessing what the empress wanted to see by calling so many people over. At this moment, when they saw the distorted scenery reflected in the concave mirrors on the tall shelf, Shi Qing, Zhikohai, Tong Jinye, and the others immediately knew what it was. It was just that they didn't know if it was like what Deputy Prefect Rin said. If it was, it would be a joyous occasion. The others looked at the large mirror in front of them with curiosity. Is that a mirror? I don't know what it is made of. It doesn't look like a bronze mirror, but it's actually so bright. But the reflection doesn't seem to be moving. Look at the stone in the mirror, it's deformed. Hey, look at the person reflected in the mirror. His body is so short. I'm dying of laughter. The Empress looked at the large mirror in front of her. After sizing it up for a moment, she said to Rinpoche, "You can start now." Rinpoche looked very relaxed. After such a long time he had finally made this. Now was the time to showcase it. He hoped that this bunch of idiots wouldn't mess it up. Following his greeting, 30 guards who were usually in charge of his arrangements ran to one side and carried out 30 mirrors that were 2 meters long and 1 meter tall. Then they placed them on the ground in front of the shelf. Following which, someone carried out a 4 meters long iron pillar that was as thick as the mouth of a bowl and placed it on the ground. Rinpoche walked to the front of the 30 mirrors and adjusted the angle of one of them to reflect the sunlight onto the concave mirror on the shelf. Then, after the concave mirror focused the sunlight onto the top of the iron pillar. After he adjusted the angle, the others followed his movements and began to adjust the mirror. From time to time, Rinpoche helped everyone adjust the mirror. At the beginning, many people had their eyes on him. However, as the Empress, Shurqing, and the others stared at the top of the iron pillar, more and more people looked over. They were doubtful about what they could see. But immediately they got a huge shock. The top of the iron pillar suddenly burst into flames for no reason. One had to know that this was an iron pillar. Everyone wasn't blind. From the footsteps of the person carrying the iron pillar and the way it stood up, it was definitely an iron pillar. But how could an iron pillar catch fire? Something even more surprising happened. Not only was the top of the iron pillar on fire, but it was also melting. Dark red molten iron flowed down the body of the pillar. Very quickly the top of the iron pillar was missing a chunk. Not only were those who saw it for the first time shocked, even Shurqing and the others were surprised. Previously it was only a round plate that burned a hole in a steel saber. Now it melted an iron rod that was as thick as the mouth of a bowl. The difficulty was more than 10 times or even 100 times greater. Therefore, when they personally saw the effect, they were all shocked. I congratulate Your Majesty and Dayo. Deputy Prefect Ren has made a great contribution by making this item. Within 100 years, Dayo will no longer have to worry about a shortage of iron, Shurqing said loudly with a face full of joy. Following his words, everyone reacted and congratulated Her Majesty one after another. Although they didn't know what happened, they understood one thing. That iron pillar that was as thick as the mouth of a bowl had been melted. In that case, Mount Damo's iron mine would soon have a steady stream of fine iron ore. They would no longer have to worry about the lack of military equipment. This was indeed a joyous occasion, And Rinpoche, who had contributed the most to this matter, had a higher status in the hearts of many people. Previously, when Her Majesty said that she wanted him to set up an academy, everyone didn't take it too seriously. Many people didn't even consider it. In the future, if Her Majesty asked about it, they would say that even though the disciples and their family were not talented enough, they just needed to focus on practicing martial arts. However, from the looks of it now, this person really had some capabilities. Chapter 277. On the second floor of a restaurant on Jingyang Avenue near Beihong District, more than 10 young men and women were sitting around 2 tables. Have you heard that Her Majesty wants to open an educational institute? A tall and burly youth who was about 16 or 17 years old said while drinking at the table. Rinpoche is in charge, another youth casually said. The one who spoke was a beautiful young girl who was about 17 or 18 years old. She slammed her bowl on the table. The others looked at her and laughed mischievously, but they didn't restrain themselves. This young girl was called Lu Yueyao. She suffered a big loss during the Great Hunt and was verbally abused by Rinpoche. In the end, everyone had no choice but to stand up and target her. After that, she received 10 lashes and was grounded for a month as punishment. Originally, she wanted to find an opportunity to take revenge after she was released. However, after staying at home for a few days, she heard a piece of news that made her dumbstruck. That pretty boy who only knew how to talk was actually chosen as the Empress's future husband. She couldn't figure out what Her Majesty saw in that kid. Her Majesty wasn't only the Empress, but she was also the 7th most powerful expert in the world. Her beauty was enough to enchant countless people. However, such a person actually chose that kid as her husband. This almost made her smash everything in the room. As time went by, her hatred for Rinpoche didn't diminish at all. Instead, it intensified. Every time she heard news about Rinpoche, she would feel unhappy. However, the others didn't care much about her feelings. Instead, they chatted about the educational institute. What does an educational institute teach? This wasn't something that only one person wanted to know. Educational institutes were still new in Dayo. It should be the same as Great Xia. They teach calligraphy, mathematics, military strategy, and law. Someone said with certainty. Maybe there's even Confucian classics. Someone laughed. That's hard to say, someone replied. Confucian classics was the general name for several doctrines that were passed down a long time ago. They mainly taught people to be kind, how to discipline themselves, and how to think about heaven and earth, society and people and nature. It was the main doctrine in Great Xia, the Yun nation and the Qin nation. However, the aboriginals didn't like it, let alone the descendants of the officials. In Dayo the fist was the hard truth. Although there were laws in most people's hearts, fists were the most important. Everyone put this matter aside after discussing for a while. Besides practicing martial arts, these young people would at most read a few books at home. They would also call their friends to have fun outside and occasionally talk about the happenings in Lan City. For example, the matter of the Black Star Academy. Everyone just casually talked about it and no one took it too seriously. It was also impossible for them to enter any school. Everyone knew that only those who were not particularly talented would go. Ren Baqin was sitting in Yangxin Palace Hall with a list of names given to him by the Empress. On it were the names of the students who were sent by the court officials to enter the academy. Shirgan, don't tell me he's the grandson of the great elder? Ren Baqin casually asked when he saw the first name. It's his youngest son, the Empress said faintly. Oh, great elder is indeed young at heart despite his age, Ren Baqin exclaimed. The great elder should be at least 70 or 80 years old, right? It was written that Shirgan was 12 years old, which meant that the great elder was still having a son when he was 60 or 70 years old. Ren Baqin continued to read and immediately saw a familiar name. Tong Lan, 10 years old. This little girl's innate talent isn't good? Ren Baqin was shocked. She was only 10 years old, yet she kept telling him why flowers were so red and that her innate talent wasn't good? Tong Lan's innate talent is pretty good, at least it's better than her grandfather, the Empress said. Didn't they say that all the students are good-for-nothings with poor innate talent? Ren Baqin pointed at the name list and questioned. Tong Jinya said that since she's still young, she can stay in the academy for 2 years and consider it as finding a playmate. The Empress plucked a grape and threw it into her mouth. Ren Baqin was speechless. Do you think this is a kindergarten? However, after thinking about it, he had suffered so many losses in the hands of that girl and suffered so many beatings. This was a good opportunity for him to take revenge. It's never too late for a gentleman to take revenge. As for the thought of letting her off because she was a delicious Lolita, Ren Baqin extinguished it before it could even form in his mind. If you don't take revenge, you're not a gentleman. A great man can't be ruthless. These were the words of the ancestor and he couldn't forget them. Hee hee. Ren Baqin grinned and laughed. The Empress took another look at him and rolled her eyes. She could roughly guess what Ren Baqin was thinking at this moment. However, that girl Tong Lan was very crafty. At that time it was uncertain who would be torturing who. Ren Baqin looked at the names on the list. There were a total of 31 people, which was about what he expected. He could only teach these disciples by himself. However, after thinking about it, Ren Baqin said, "Can you recruit a few from the commoners? They can stay in the academy as teachers in the future." After all, these were the children of the big shots in the imperial court. In the future they would most likely become officials in various places. He couldn't possibly be the only one teaching them, right? All right. The Empress nodded her head. But have you thought of a name? Lanxiang Academy. Ren Baqin looked serious. Seeing that the Empress's eyes were starting to twitch, Ren Baqin immediately changed his tune and said, "I'm joking. Actually, it's called New East." Seeing that the Empress's eyes were starting to emit a murderous aura, Ren Baqin changed his tune again and said, "Actually, this is also a joke. Let's call it Black Bamboo Academy. A few days ago, I saw a few purple bamboos in a small bamboo forest nearby." The Empress was more or less satisfied when she heard this name. She continued to eat her grapes and ignored Ren Baqin. It's going to be New Year in a month, right? Are there any activities for New Year? After that, the academy will start the enrollment, Ren Baqin asked. He still didn't know how to celebrate New Year in Dayo. Yes, lantern grabbing. The Empress explained. In the past, it was limited to young people below the age of 20, and the winners will be rewarded. If the others perform well, they will also be favored by the girls in the villages. If you want to participate, I can give you special permission to participate. If you perform well, I might even reward you. The Empress said with a smile on her face. What rules? Ren Baqin was immediately excited. First, build a frame and hang the lantern on it. The participants will be divided into groups of 10 and can choose their own people. The person who grabs the lantern first wins. The Empress's eyes were full of smiles. Don't tell me I can fight against the others? Rinpoche immediately laughed dryly. Of course, this is the time to show off your skills, the Empress said as a matter of course. Forget it then. Rinpoche immediately rejected her. He couldn't even beat a 10-year-old Lolita, so he would be courting death if he participated. Don't you want to hear about my reward? The Empress's tone carried a rare gentleness that made Rinpoche's heart flutter. However, he immediately shook his head like a rattled drum and said, I'm a man and I won't participate if I say I won't. Since the Empress had spoken like this, it definitely wasn't anything good. There was a huge pit ahead and only a fool would jump into it. I can give you a kiss. The Empress's voice was so soft that Rinpoche could hear her clearly. Upon hearing this, Rinpoche suddenly raised his head and looked at the Empress. Her face was flushed, and her shy look made Rinpoche feel as if there was a pile driver in his chest. Rinpoche put on a righteous face and said, I feel that death is inevitable. It can be as heavy as Mount Tai or as light as a goose feather. I will die without regrets for your majesty. Then he changed the topic and said helplessly, It's not that I'm unwilling to participate in the lantern-grabbing contest, but I've been afraid of heights since I was young and can't climb high. Therefore, even though I feel pain, I have no choice but to give up. Chapter 278. On a plane flying from Tokyo to Shanghai, Rinpoche looked at the Empress who had thrown a tantrum for a few days and sighed. I think I'd better participate in the lantern-grabbing event. Even though I have a serious fear of heights, a real man has his limits. The Empress tilted her head, looked at him from the corner of her eyes, and then turned to look at the scenery outside. The Empress had been throwing a tantrum for a few days. She didn't say a word and only rolled her eyes when she saw him. She wasn't like the cold and aloof Empress at all. This was the first time such a situation had happened to the Empress. At first he felt that the Empress was quite amusing, but after a long time, it wasn't so fun anymore. In fact, Rinpoche had some guesses in his heart. Could it be that the Empress had come to visit her? This was because the Empress would occasionally reveal such a feminine side, which was very different from her usual self. Other women had good tempers most of the time, but there would always be a few days a month when they were not normal and had a terrible temper. On the other hand, the Empress was cold and aloof most of the time. Every month she would be abnormal and very feminine. The more Rinpoche thought about it, the more he felt that this possibility was not small. As the saying went, there must be something wrong with something abnormal. Rinpoche reached out and grabbed the Empress's hand. It was very soft and warm. He was relieved that he didn't feel the expected "pa," and the pain didn't come. These few days he had also asked people about the lantern-grabbing event and more or less understood it. Just like what the Empress said, the lantern-grabbing event was divided into groups of 10. 9 of them were there to protect the commander. The participating groups could also attack other groups. Even though they couldn't be heavy-handed, there would be serious injuries every year. Fortunately, the Aboriginals had thick skin and flesh, so there wouldn't be any deaths. Also, both parties couldn't use weapons, but they could wear armor. Generally, it was leather armor. It wasn't very useful, but it had some protective effect. This gave Rinpoche some ideas. Since they could wear armor, was there a limit to leather or iron armor? He could make a full-body armor with steel spikes and make himself look like a hedgehog. Who would dare to touch him then? When the time came, he just had to bump into the crowd. It was decided. When the plane landed, Rinpoche held the Empress's hand and walked out of the cabin. They froze like dogs. The two of them had just come back from Hawaii. They had changed planes in Japan and had specially bought 2 thick coats. However, it was still very cold when they came out. So cold. Rinpoche tightened his clothes with one hand and pulled the Empress's hand with the other. They followed the crowd and walked forward. But he was finally back. It had been almost half a year. When he escaped, it was the end of June and the beginning of July. Now it was the last day of December. Tomorrow would be the new year. Mr. Rin. Rinpoche was stopped the moment he stepped out of the airport. The other party was a man in his 30s, and there was a man and a woman beside him. There's actually a plane to pick me up. This treatment is a little beyond the norm. Rinpoche laughed. It looks familiar. I think I've seen it before. Yes, I was even shot by Mr. Rin before, the other party said with a face full of hidden bitterness. It was just a joke. Don't be offended. Actually, I have a lot of respect for people like you who work for the country. Rinpoche immediately knew who it was. He laughed and directly brushed the matter aside. All three looked askance at him. Respect? Sorry, they really couldn't tell. Both of you, please. The three of them didn't say anything else. There were 2 cars waiting outside. Rinpoche and the Empress got into the car at the back while the middle-aged man sat in the front passenger seat. Rinpoche held the Empress's hand along the way. In any case, as long as there wasn't a pa, he wasn't prepared to let go and was prepared to hold her hand until next year. 2 hours later, the car entered the underground parking lot of a building and the few of them alighted. After entering the elevator, the Empress lowered her head and looked at the hand that Rinpoche was still holding. Pa. Rinpoche looked at his hand that was swollen like a pig's trotter and said seriously, "It's a little thicker and rounder than last time. I might have put on weight recently." The three of them looked askance at him and inexplicably felt that they had been showered with dog food. When they got out of the elevator, there were already people waiting outside. 5 or 6 men and women in suits were waiting at the entrance. The one in front said rather enthusiastically, "Mr. Rin, Madam Chi, you are finally back." Those who didn't know would think that the 2 of them had gone overseas to study. The other party was a newly established department with a huge research team behind them. They were prepared to study the things that Rinpoche had brought out. For the next half of the day, they discussed in detail about some cooperation matters. The previous time was just a preliminary agreement between both parties. This time it was official. First of all, Rinpoche couldn't be as reckless as before. At least he still had to abide by the country's laws. He couldn't be reckless just because of his special status. With regards to this, Rinpoche didn't have any objections. If no one provoked him, he wouldn't create trouble for no reason anyway. However, Rinpoche asked for the identities of the 2 secret departments, which was the department that Chinshir was in. In the future, it would be easier to deal with matters outside. At the very least, they could scare off a lot of trouble if they encountered any problems. Originally, the other party wanted to give Rinpoche and Qi Zixiao a nominal position in the army, but was rejected by Rinpoche. If that was the case, the 2 of them would be tied together. After that, they added some details about the cooperation. For example, if the research results of the things that Rinpoche brought back were to be studied, how would they be distributed? Generally speaking, the country would take the majority. However, Rinpoche had the right to know. There was no reason for him to be kept in the dark about the research results of the things that Rinpoche brought back. Furthermore, some of the research results could be converted into commercial applications. Both parties added some details in this area. For this matter, Rinpoche couldn't possibly ask a lawyer for help. It was entirely up to him. He didn't know if he would be at a disadvantage or benefiting from some aspects. After half a day, both parties understood some of the ideas of the other party and reached a partial agreement. In the end, Rinpoche felt that his brain was hurting. It was too troublesome to talk to these people because it was all about minor details. However, this was something that had to be done. If these things weren't explained clearly, who knew what certain people would do in the future? Especially after 10, 20, or 30 years, no one could say for sure what the current leaders would think. For most people, there wasn't a need to consider so much. However, for Rinpoche, 30 years on Earth was equivalent to 15 years. Finally, both parties reached a memorandum of understanding. As for a contract, it was impossible to have one. The Empress sat there in a daze the entire time. She wasn't the least bit interested in such matters. After that, Rinpoche took out some things that he brought along. A bottle of soil, a bottle that contained an outstanding little white flower that he picked from the garden, and a piece of stone. These things looked ordinary, but they were the foundation of a world. From these things, it might be possible to see the differences between Earth and that world. The other party immediately arranged for people to keep these things. "Mr. Rin, we need something more special." The person who spoke was Yang Sen, the head of the newly established department called Messier 87. Messier 87 was a galaxy located in the constellation Virgo. This name also implied another world. From this, it could be seen that some people regarded the so-called paradise as a completely different world. After all, in the theory of Taoism, the paradise was located in the space of the big world. As a result, they had various kinds of connections with our world. At the same time, due to the relative isolation of their existence, the paradise had its own unique space-time structure. Therefore, the paradise could be said to be another world. However, Rinpoche felt that the person who came up with this name had probably seen too much Ultraman. Research always has to start from the basics. I also want to know what these basics are different from each other. I will bring some more things over a period of time, and some of them will be what you want, Rinpoche said. It's a pleasure working with you. The other party nodded. They also wanted to know what Rinpoche wanted to know. Since Rinpoche said that he would bring more things over a period of time, it was fine. You can contact me if there's anything. Yang Sun handed a business card without a name to Rinpoche. I will try my best to help you settle some things within my capabilities. However, breaking the law doesn't count. That night, Rinpoche held the Empress's hand at the bund and looked at the 4D lights in the sky. The gorgeous colors shone on everyone. There were young people everywhere, and most of the cold wind was blocked by the people around them. As time passed, the surrounding atmosphere became more and more enthusiastic. 60 seconds, 59, 58. As the countdown began, this year had come to an end. Rinpoche held the Empress's hands at the right time and stood opposite her. 10, 9, 8. As the last 10 seconds passed, many couples around them shouted while holding hands or hugging each other. In the last few seconds, many people wanted to leave a kiss that crossed the new year. Rinpoche stared into the Empress's eyes and saw that her gaze was like the surface of a lake. Her face was slightly bashful. Rinpoche moved his mouth closer to hers when the last 3, 2, 1 resounded. This was such a good opportunity. What if the Empress was infected by this atmosphere? Rinpoche thought to himself. The Empress's body shrank back a little. Then she subconsciously raised her hand and lightly hammered Rinpoche's chest. This action was very common on television, and the Empress had seen it many times. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.